bro. It's a tactic.
So I'll just introduce you here. My next guest is friend of the show and perpetual frenemy Pisco. We talk until the wee hours of the morning quite often. Pisco is a lawyer. I think it'd be fair to say that you're a leftist. I think that you'll be the second guest that I think I'll ask you, but that's actively cheering for Democrats to win here in the midterm election. But it's important to bring on different perspectives, especially ones that you could beat up on. Now, I like talking to Pisco because even if I think that he's partisan beyond hope, I think he's an intelligent person, and talking to people that aren't insane people talking about shoving Molly up their rectum and things like that is a good thing. And so it's much better than the crop of insane lefties that I normally talk to. So
that really got to you, huh?
I think it's a funny line, so I say it all the time.
Yeah.
But no, I honestly, all kidding aside, I do appreciate you, especially at a weird hour like this of coming on. I appreciate it, and it's sort of a hostile environment. A bunch of people watching. We had Republican congressmen on, so I appreciate it. I think it's a very nice thing you're doing.
Yeah, of course.
Glenn Thompson was on this morning. Former ambassador to Denmark, Carla Sands was on. So we got some.
Oh boy, and listen, I think you're like me in this way, which is we both like the test of fire, and the test of really earning it. People talk about the marketplace of free ideas. That's not just a meme to me. Because not only do I think that you do get truth by testing your ideas, you become confident in that truth. And you only get confidence, I think, in that truth. You only feel like it's truth if it's been tested. And so one of the things that I really credit you for observing is I think there is, I think it's both on the right and the left, but at least in terms of prominent personalities on Twitch politics especially, there is this untested assumption of correctness from a lot of people on the left, which I do recognize that that's there. And having to earn it, I think is really important for me to feel confident. And I think among the righties online, there's a lot of easy targets to go after. Mm-hmm. So I like to go after that whale, I like to.
I've lost some weight,
comment, by the way.
You bastard! Starting out with it.
That's not a comment. That's a comment about your.
That's funny.
Your stature as a debater, not as your stature.
That's funny. It's good. Yeah, I mean, it's something that'll serve everyone, right? You should try to get out of your bubble and talk to people, particularly people that are competent, right? Because it's not just on the Twitch sphere. It's also, I saw it in. You see how this weird perversion of what a bubble could lead to when I did policy debate in college, and forget the ideological bent that it was radically left-wing. Just take the stylistic choices, So here's a platform where you have 9 minutes per speech in your first speeches, and some brilliant genius over time realized if I talk a little faster, then I could get more arguments in. And so now you're left with an activity where everyone talks as fast as humanly possible. It sounds like a bunch of auctioneers, and if anyone comes in, they won't be able to hear it. So people are talking about this, things about nuclear war, the burning American flag, and things like that, but they don't even have the topic. And we have everything that's going into the debate, and that's how they talk. And it's like, you hear that, you're like, that's impressive. But then, the thing that you soon realize is like, this is a fucking joke. You put everyone in this bubble for 30 years. Just now, the people that debated are now the judges, and now there's a new crop that goes a little faster, and the arguments become a little more hyperbolic. And now it's like, oh, you want to reduce corn subsidies by 2%? Well, I'm going to speak 200 words a minute about how that'll cause nuclear war in 10 different ways, and it's like, because that bubble's been there, and never mind the ideological bent, but just that stylistic bubble. That's what happens if no one from the outside is engaging in your ideas. You end up becoming a joke of yourself. And these aren't dumb people. Almost most of the people at the top level were objectively smarter than me. Right. That's the prevailing style, so it's.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because I was a Model UN guy. We had a really good debate team, but debate is almost like a sport in some ways. Like I thought that it's just debate, but no, these people traveled. They didn't go to parties. It was a sport for them, and so Model UN I think was I don't want to say less serious, less time commitment at the very least version of that. And these I call them meta games. The meta games prevail in some ways. Not because the people who engage in them aren't capable, as you said, but just because they're successful strats, and but they become the ends in two of themselves. And so in Model UN, maybe that's building connections with people to vote on your to be a signatory or to be a sponsor of whatever, I don't know, whatever resolution is going to
Right.
be passed. But that's not really the contest of ideas. It's the metagame. It's the negotiation. It's the building of relationships, which is a skill worth having.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just not what I was looking for in that sense. I think Model UN was useful for many other reasons, but nothing really scratched that itch except for these kinds of contentious one-on-one,
Yeah.
uh, item by item things, which I think you don't necessarily always get in these formats that favor the game within the game. Does that
Right.
make any sense?
Yeah, no, it does. Like it's like, look, you know, there's several things that could be going on in a conversation at the same time, or why people do things. I stream because I have fun doing it. Like that's my reason. I'm also a
Mm,
competitive asshole. The reason I did
yeah.
policy, if I did policy debate and it was like, well, we don't declare a winner, I'd have been like, yeah, fuck this. I'm going and getting drunk. This is stupid. Like I wanted to win. That was it. And I was. It's a weird story. I've talked a little about debate today. I'll just say this real quick. I had the good fortune of, I joined the debate team in Clarion University the second semester, and so there were a crop of people that were novices that had a full semester under their belt, other than me. And when I joined, there was an excellent debate team, a partner of two people, a guy and a girl, who then got married. There's a lot of debate partners that ended up getting married, but they were in the running for qualifying for the national debate tournament.
Oh boy.
And that was that's the top 72 teams in the country, but each school can send 3 teams. So for a little rinky dink state school to even be in the conversation was a huge deal. And I remember watching them 10 hours a day, busting their ass, busting their ass, busting their
Sure.
ass. And I went to the district tournament, and they sadly came basically one round away from making it. And it devastated that team. It devastated the guy on that team. And he was drained. He gave it his all, and he lost. And I remember right then being like, I'm fucking making it to that tournament. I'm doing it. And so everything that I did in debate, like in the novice level, you have so much eligibility at the novice level. I started kicking ass. I was winning tournaments. And a lot of teams, what they do is they sandbag you. Stay novice as long as you can and win all those tournaments. I said, fuck all that. Throw me in with the big dogs, because at the end, if my goal, the last debate I ever do, is to be as good as possible to qualify for that tournament, I need to be debating the best people right now. So I took my lumps. I got my ass kicked because I was advancing as fast as I could. And so I went from losing in novice to winning until immediately losing in JV, then winning, then losing again in the open division. And, but that was sort of the competitive asshole in me. I knew I would never be the best debater ever, but I set a goal that it was like, I could make it to that upper echelon. I could make it to that tournament. And it was purely because of the competitive nature. I liked learning. I liked researching. I liked making friends. I liked the activity of debate. But I liked winning. That was it. That was the primary. Ironically, my partner was a Buddhist hippie who could have gave a shit less about winning. True story. He really is. He's vegetarian, like looks like Jesus. Like we were Jack Spratt and his wife. Like he was a tall beanpole. I was this stubby fat guy. I'm super capitalist. He's a Buddhist socialist, And that's why I say people don't understand when I say like there are friends out there that I have that are as left wing as you can imagine. But we've learned to put our political differences aside and just enjoy people as people. But that was it. And so there is part of that in what I do here. I'm not inauthentic, right? I'm not arguing positions I don't believe just for clout or to win. I'm
I actually
arguing
can't.
what I believe.
Can I just start? Like, I actually can't do that. And it actually, when I find out that someone's just doing a devil's argument stuff, at least I can do it for a little bit. But like when I'm on a stream, I don't really want to talk to people who aren't sincere. Sincerity for me is like is so important for the people I'm talking to, for me to feel fulfilled. If I'm just I don't know, talking to somebody, fuck, I don't like throwing people on the bus, but there are some people who I know on this, and I'm sure that you're aware of some people whose whole job it is on certain debate panels is to be controversial or to be the whatever, and it's kind of an open secret, I think.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
It's hard for me to like to engage with those people, and so I do think you believe what you believe. I don't think that you want for lack of sincerity. So I do want to say that.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, to me though, it's still there's still part of it that wants to be competitive. There is, you know, the devil's advocate thing has a place. One of the things they tout about policy debate, they call it switch side debating, right? And there is utility in being forced to argue your opponent's argument. So, you
Oh,
know,
wait, I want to put a proviso here because I see something in the chat already. I'm not saying that it's not useful and that lawyers absolutely, when you're prepping an oral argument or you're prepping something, you have to think about what the other side is going to think. And so that way of thinking is super important. Like when I'm thinking about what I'm going to say to Rob about, um, I don't know, the standards of proof for some crime or whatever, I'm thinking about what he's going to say in response. That's it. I'm just saying I don't get the personal enjoyment as much as if it were the real thing. And certainly if I know that someone like whose whole stick is that, and they go around the panel scene doing that kind of thing, it turns me off a little bit.
so
And
I agree, but let me say this: we're not gonna have it be a love fest. We'll fucking argue like we
yeah,
always
yeah,
do.
we're gonna argue, sure.
So let me say this, right? Like, yeah, I agree. There's a difference to that. Like, there's the person that's just going on because it's like the bigger asshole I am. It's more contentious, clicks, blah 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 blah. I don't put you in that category. But I do stand by my claims that I think you're partisan partisan to the point of hackery on a lot of these issues. And I waffle. Look, I'll say for the benefit of the doubt right now that, okay, maybe it's not intentional, but I think you're a smart guy. And so it becomes tough for me to reconcile some of these obvious things that we look at and the hoops you're willing to jump through partisan reasons and to say, like, well, you know, it's good faith. It's just extremely misguided. And I think that, you know, I was talking to Counterpoints before you came on, and, you know, talking to him, it's like, you know, I think he's right when we're talking about hypothetical positions like the Martha's Vineyard debate, which maybe we'll get into that, where it's like,
Yeah, yeah.
you kind of just have to just laugh at people that are making the argument you're making. That's like, well, maybe they didn't have the resources. Like, it's just a laughable position. And I don't know how to square the fact that I know you're an intelligent person with, but you're making such what I consider a nonsensical, clearly erroneous argument. But it's not, it's good faith. I
Yeah.
don't know how to square that.
Yeah, let's talk about a couple of things. So on the partisan hackery level, right? I don't make any apology that, like as you said, I'm rooting for Democrats on Tuesday. I don't frankly think their odds are terribly great to win this election. I'm fairly you know, after watching that debate performance in Pennsylvania and seeing Fetterman's approval, and listen, if I were a hack, right, I would be saying things like, or at least if I was on the level of hack of some people, right, I'd be saying things like, oh, it's not that bad. That debate performance, we should be focusing on what Oz was saying about, you know, make the choice between your state, maybe all that stuff, right? Because listen, I agree with your interpretation of that statement. There have always been rules about abortions on with local politicians. That's what Roe v. Wade embraces, and so that's clearly what he was referencing, saying like you should have local laws that affect abortion because, of course, there should be laws that affect all medical treatments, even if you are abortion very, very left wing, you would say on abortion, or very, very pro-choice. You're not going to regulate abortion at least a little. You're not going to have any restrictions at all, even on who's licensed to perform abortions. Like, no, it was clear what Oz meant. And so if I was a hack, you know, I'd be like, oh my God, Fetterman's performance wasn't that bad. You know, anyone who's making fun of him as being a bully. No, those are totally fair questions, that kind of thing. So that's just an aside to show you, one, that I am pro-Democrat, but I'm not I'm not willing to, at least from my perception, you might think I lose credibility, but from my perception, there are lines I won't cross. And I won't be like, oh my God, Joe Biden's a great speaker. He's not a great speaker. Joe Biden doesn't make mistakes. He does make mistakes. The Afghanistan attack, you know, the attack on the innocent children in Afghanistan, that was a fucking disaster. That's horrible. You know, the withdrawal from Afghanistan, you know, it was, by all accounts, it was a messy withdrawal.
Right.
Like when you like, I'm willing to say there are policies that Biden is doing. Biden is embracing things that look very similar to remain in Mexico. They're not exactly the same, but there are some immigration policies that I don't agree with him there on. There are plenty of opportunities I will take to criticize the Democrats, but I think there are key issues that you think are because I think what matters most to you are things like corruption,
Right.
and the power of the state and freedom. Right? You put them in the buckets of
Sure.
integrity of institutions and personal freedom. I think that those, if I were to characterize your concerns, and I think you and I just have very different priors on that, and because there are issues that are very important to you, it clouds a lot of what you think about me in other areas where I think maybe that's where we're getting off the wrong page.
Okay, but so let me say this. I do put the argument of the Martha's Vineyard thing in a separate argument of the other things that I've criticized you with, because I think when we're talking about like behavior of the FBI, behavior of the State Department, behavior of those sorts of things, and those issues are most important to me, these issues of what I consider corruption of these institutions. I think that you have also a vested interest in defending the sanctity of those institutions as non-corrupt. Whereas I think that even though you might be cheering for Democrats, right, you don't have this sort of partisan nature to ignore abject reality when it comes to like Joe Biden's not a good speaker. He did, Fetterman fucked that debate up royally. Those aren't things that I think that you would have a tendency to be a partisan act. Similarly, right, let's say my issue with Trump, let's say I was defending a particular issue with Trump, right? But it wasn't fiscal conservatism. I'm like, yeah, you're right, he spent too much money. But that doesn't mean what I'm saying, like, there's no way that Trump slept with Stormy Daniels. There's no way. At some point, you'd be like, Rob, fucking come on. But I wouldn't be a hack, or I would say to myself, but I criticize Trump in these other areas that I don't find important. Now, the Martha's Vineyard thing, just to talk about real quick, I put in a separate category. I put in that category of, like, that's a frustrating one because it's like, come on, dude. Like, everybody knows that it's just a bullshit argument. Everybody knows. And I don't understand why you even, like, where the utility is of you making that argument.
Let's diagnose it. Okay. Right? So, and they're really separate, the kind of things that I want to talk about the Martha Vineyard story. Okay. Number one, this is what I would call substance, which is, are we okay with governors assisting in the travel of immigrants without status, in other words, undocumented citizens, but some people will call illegal immigrants, to places where ostensibly, they can share the load, or you might even say people where they're more open to these people, and they at least they claim to be more humanitarian with these individuals. Is there anything against that wrong with that policy as such? I really don't have a problem with it, because you're absolutely correct that why should it be the case that if you're claiming the benefits of this population, and that you want to help these people and they deserve a chance to apply for asylum, to just disclaim them entirely and reject them entirely and be like, no, it's wrong for these people to transport them. That is rank hypocrisy. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's one basket of things where I'm like, okay, in principle and theory, like do I think it's like necessarily, do I think it necessarily speaks well of the character of the governors? No, but does it necessarily speak poorly? Not necessarily. I mean, they're listening to their constituents. They have different perceptions and different values, and so I get it. I'm not going to condemn these people as racist just because they have that policy. No. Second bucket of things has to do with like the allegations of misleading the people, and there I think you and I had some agreement that even if you agree with the merits of the policy, probably not okay to do the lying if they did lie. We don't know they lied, and if they lied, we don't know to what extent it goes up. I think it's important for us always to and I think you do an okay job at this. Maybe not with your retweets, but your retweet, I don't take your retweets as your own visions or as your own ideas. And I have retweet things that aren't confirmed either. When we're just retweeting, I don't expect us to necessarily have everything confirmed. That second kind of basket of things is I think you and I both would not agree with the line if it existed, or the fraud if it existed, because if it's a material lie, right?
Right.
The third one, which is really the meat of our argument, is the accusations of hypocrisy towards the residents of Martha's Vineyard. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is where we maybe see things differently. Mm-hmm. And
That.
so this is my vision of your perspective, and you tell me if I'm wrong about it.
Mhm.
The people of Martha's Vineyard have this sign up that all but said, it's totally accepting of refugees and of non-citizens, and it's exclaiming or describing a perspective towards these people that is super accommodating and ultra accepting. Fair?
Mm-hmm.
They're brought onto their shores, and within days, the migrants are gone.
Mm-hmm.
How could that not be hypocrisy?
Right.
A 1 + 1 is 2, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And the burden for you to show that it's not hypocrisy, it would need to be some substantial evidence that Martha's Vineyard really couldn't accept however many there was, 50 migrants or something.
Yeah, I think 48, but something
40,
like
okay,
that. We'll say 50. I don't know. It's around that
yeah,
number. Yep.
and we're not going to credit the statements of people who have like reasons to not be necessarily forthcoming with us.
Mm-hmm.
And so, given all those factors, just like the overwhelming evidence is this is hypocrisy. They could have taken them in.
Yeah.
Okay.
But,
So I think
but,
yeah.
but here's
So you're
the
asking
problem,
where?
right? So, okay, you said a lot there. Like on points one and
Yeah,
two,
I'm sorry.
these are like points one and two. I don't disagree with, right? Where it's like, yeah, there are credible things you could say, even if you had the opposite stance on point one, right? I think that there's areas of, within the realm of reasonable debate that you could question those sorts of things. We don't have a lot of disagreement on those points, anyways. So I think you identify that it's point three. And that's the point that I'm so frustrated with because even in the context of this hypocrisy opinion, there might be ways to wiggle. It's like, well, is it hypocrisy? Because in order for it to be hypocrisy, two things have to be true. The first thing has to be that they've purported themselves in a certain way. And in the certain way I'm talking about would be that they were, no one's an illegal here. We're sanctuary. We think these people are great. They're a boon to, the country. There is no crisis. What are you talking about? It's all gravy, right? So I'd have to win that they say that. I think they do. I'm not saying that everyone in Martha's Vineyard said that. I'm sure there are people that are conservative or even people that are left-leaning that don't necessarily agree with that. But I think in general, sort of the projection that the people of Martha's Vineyard and areas like that have point out, particularly calling themselves a sanctuary area, I think that it shows that. The second area is that I have to show that when it came to, instead of just words with actions, they did the opposite of that. And that's clear that that's what occurred, that they, brought these people in. It wasn't a huge amount of people, and within 2 days, they had shipped them out. That happened. And so the third thing that I have to prove is that there weren't extenuating circumstances that means that that's not hypocrisy. Mm-hmm. And that's where the frustration I have with your argument is, where your best argument, I don't know that you're really arguing against point one or two. It seems that your argument is, well, 1 and 2 is right, but the people of Martha's Vineyard just didn't have the resources or the room. That's bullshit.
Right.
It's just absolute bullshit.
Yeah. So point one is the stated position number one, which is that we accept and accommodate the migrants. Mm-hmm. I think I'm accepting that, I'm assuming for the purpose of this argument that it's true, because I'm assuming Martha's Vineyard is overwhelmingly Democrat, and I'm assuming that that it is, as you say, that the representatives who are putting out these statements prior to the migrants being brought there are representative of their, constituents to the extent, or the whatever councils or whatever the fuck they have there. Remind me, number two is the fact that they're bringing them there, or what's number two in the argument?
Number two was, and I think that you would have to agree with this, that there wasn't a huge number. It was 48, 50 migrants, and they had them for less than 2 days. So
that events transpired largely as reported, right? Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then number three was there was extenuating circumstance that made it necessary.
So this is where I guess I fight on to to defend the good people of Martha's Vineyard. Number one is, I think, a general policy statement, which is, just because you're in favor of a given policy doesn't mean that you ought to be the one, right, that you believe that policy should be channeled through a particular mechanism. What do I mean by that? I'm in favor, let me elaborate a little more. I'm in favor probably of higher taxes than you are, right? do I think it's a good idea for us, if the level of taxation is not at the level that I think is appropriate, am I a hypocrite for not donating my money up to the level that I think would be an appropriate taxation amount? I think. Well, go ahead, sir.
No, not necessarily, right? Like, so for
Okay,
example, if
yeah,
you say, I think we should have a 30% tax rate for earners in my bracket, but there isn't one, so I'm going to continue to pay the 5% tax rate. I don't think that necessarily makes you a hypocrite. It can, there are ways that it can,
yeah,
but I think that's in theory, yeah, you could see a situation. Let me give you an example that is often used against the right winger. Ron Paul was against all these pork projects, but oftentimes he put pork into legislation
amendments.
that he amendments, and his
Yeah,
point was it's unfair to my constituents if I'm the only one not playing this game. My constituents will suffer because everyone plays this game. So even though I want everyone to cancel this game, if they're not going to, then I have no choice but
yeah,
to, so that doesn't
yeah.
necessarily make you a hypocrite.
Okay, so and likewise, I think that this is gonna sound fucked up, right? But I don't think it's hypocritical for Martha's Vineyard people to be like, I want our governments to take care of migrants, but I don't want them to take care of it at the level of providing them Martha's Vineyard level care, right? I suppose that were the argument, right? I um I I want us to take care of refugees, but I don't want to give them $80,000, whatever that amount. Now, there are ways that this is at odds with the argument that this isn't the best place to have them, right? Well, one argument would be like, well, we want to have them, we just don't want to give them the best resources, right? And that's kind of at odds with the notion that which what they said, which is um, we don't have the resources at the moment. And so there are ways in which those are counterintuitive and conflict with each other. But I'm just merely expressing the point that just because you're in favor of a particular policy approach, which is more benefits given.
Wait, I lost you. Shit. I ripped my headphones out. Pisco, I hope you're holding that thought.
Yeah, I did.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I wanted to put that food back in the fridge. Also, I apologize for eating it. 24
You're
hours
good. No,
stream's
you have to.
weird.
It's a 24-hour stream, bro.
Yeah.
I get it.
So, but the last I heard you saying was you were saying like you were talking about how like the accommodations, you're not saying like Martha's Vineyard level accommodation, and it could be that it's not hypocritical because just because you want this policy advocated throughout the rest of the country doesn't mean you're not a hypocrite for basically not wanting it up to the standard of being your personal standard.
Exactly right. So you want to take care of asylees, but you want to put them in warehouses, right? You want to take care of these refugees, but you don't want them eating caviar, right? And when I say it sounds harsh, but like I'm fairly certain that that's most people's perspective, at least when it comes to like welfare. Most people probably don't want welfare recipients getting more money than like, I don't know, a working class person working two jobs, right? You don't want the government when they're handing out benefits, you don't want the benefits to be to the level of whatever, right? And it wouldn't make you a hypocrite to be like, what, you're in favor of welfare. Why don't you let the poor live in your fucking, you have an extra bedroom there, bro. Shouldn't you be, feeding and housing this homeless person for free? And like, no, these are kind of collective action problems, and you agree with a policy, but you want a mechanism to do it that's detached from you and that's done by people who are, you could say, I don't know, efficiently competent or have a comparative advantage when dealing with that kind of thing.
Okay.
Does that make any sense?
I get what you're saying, but let's go back to your original analogy, and I'll tell you why it doesn't fit. A more apt analogy that you're using would be like this. Okay, maybe you're not a hypocrite if you're for a universal people in your bracket 20% income tax, but no one will do that, so you're just paying the current law, right? But instead, the more apt analogy would be you say, I think that millionaires should pay a 20% tax. And people say, okay, persuasive argument, we'll do that. And you say, oh, but not me. I'd like to continue to pay 5%. That's what makes you a hypocrite. It's similar with this situation with these illegals, where they're saying they're a benefit to society. It's not a crisis. They're human beings. We have to treat them with kindness. All people are welcome here. And so the implication of saying that it's not a crisis, and and even some go further. I won't say this is a swath of the people as Martha's Vineyard, but the argument is that it's sort of, well, it's xenophobic or racist because these are great people. They are a boon to the economy. They commit less crimes, and they're special people, and they're not a drain or anything like that. And so, yes, the people that are complaining about there's no crisis, and then when it's like, oh, I'm glad
Well,
you
that's
feel that.
interesting.
I'm glad you feel that way. Like, great, here you go. And they're like, oh,
Okay,
well, not us. That's
yeah.
different fundamentally than saying, well, I'm not going to pay the tax. I'm only going to pay the tax rate I'm enforced. That's what makes you a hypocrite.
I see a potential disconnect there. So okay, I'm seeing a potential disconnect. So first of all, on the commentary on the exceptions, right? The millionaires should be did it, but not me, right? Where like you are, it seems like the logic of your morality, where like the substance of your politic would compel you not to make an exception in your own case, and that whatever exception that you are making for yourself is some bespoke ad hoc thing that you're doing that seems very clearly, rules for thee and not for me. So to that extent, I agree that like you can always differentiate situations. And I think you've made this criticism before, at least in the FBI context. Every case is different, right? Every case is different. You're always going to find, just by virtue of the fact that case was yesterday, today's case is today. This case involves two people. The other case involves one person. The Trump Russia thing. That's I don't know. Involving the Trump campaign, and one involves the Hillary campaign. There's always things that differences that you can find in places. And I agree when there doesn't seem to be a significant component that's driving the difference. A crafty person can always find some way to distinguish, and that's why I think you have like the TM. It's quote unquote different or whatever. So I think it's okay to be skeptical about people who, on the one hand, argue for a given policy, and then also argue seemingly
Like,
not very
right,
genuinely
but
about
by
exceptions in their own case.
analogy, I was actually, and I got to give credit to someone in chat. They make the analogy even better. It would be like this if we go back to the tax. It would be you're a millionaire and you say, I think people should pay 20%, but I should pay 5%. And you're like, okay, well, what people? And you're like, the poor, they should pay the 20%. They should have the burden. I think that it's important because the money that will come into the coffers could be redistributed for good, but I think the poor should pay the brunt of it. Similarly, I think these border towns that are objectively poorer than us and they're smaller and have less resources, and there's far more people there. Instead of talking 48 people, we're talking thousands upon thousands of people. That's happening in perpetuity. It's not a crisis. They should deal with it. Trust us, it'll be good for them. But then when the smallest amount, just a pittance of it, shows up to their doorstep, they're like, we can't handle this. We don't have the
Okay,
resources.
all right. So now here I'm seeing a potential disconnect. This is what I'm talking about. There's a bit of they-them syndrome here, and I'm not talking about transgenderism or gender, whatever.
Yeah, I know.
I'm talking about the great they.
It's
great
Zer. Thank you. Oh.
yeah. They say, right? They tell you this, they tell you that. It's easy, it's alluring, and very, it can be apt in certain situations when you're just, for simplicity's sake, you're referring to, I don't know, the mainstream media, or you're referring to mainstream Democratic politicians. But I think we have to be careful, right? Like, do we have any statements from Martha's Vineyard people saying it's not a crisis? Or maybe they're electing people who say it's not a crisis. But just so you know, like, I think, at least on behalf of lawyers who service immigration clients, we've thought it was a crisis for a long time, for different reasons and for different. Listen, it sounds like you're not quite buying it, but it's absolutely the case that there is a humanitarian crisis at the border, and it's one that is manifested in different ways, including human trafficking, economic angst, to say nothing of the kind of physical travel, the toil that those kinds of things take, and people who take advantage, coyotes, all that stuff. It's a huge problem. people who say it's not a crisis, they've lost that argument, right? You agree? They've lost that argument.
Sure,
And I'm
sure.
not so sure that the people you're accusing of hypocrisy, which is the good people of Martha's Vineyard, are out here shitting on small towns, border towns. Who are they? Who are the people? It's, maybe it's mainstream Democrats that you see, but don't you have to be a little bit more targeted with your criticisms? Then I think you would be pissed off if I just said all Trump supporters X or all this supporters X. If we're
It's
talking shit about a given people, don't we have to be a little bit more targeted? Is that fair, or am I being unfair?
Well, no, because what happens is then, it would be impossible to levy almost any criticism at anyone. Like, we wouldn't be able, for example, you wouldn't be able to level criticism or compliment of any group. Now, it is true that it's hard. Labels are difficult, right? So, for example, when I say something like this, I say Democrats believe X. Inevitably, there's someone that comes on my chat and says, I'm a Democrat, I don't believe X. And I say, well, what I'm talking about is the people that are running the power and have institutional power and the prevailing orthodoxy and thought in the Democratic Party. Similarly, I will admit that I'm doing some stereotyping, talking about here's things I think that we'll say aren't in dispute, right? That they seemed to put forth people in Martha's Vineyard that talked about the importance of being a sanctuary area. And that they seem to have a lot of signs that were posted on government buildings that said, the old hate has no place here, everyone is welcome here. Would you agree that those things are not being disputed?
Yes, and I do not think that is inconsistent with a view that there's a border at the crisis, or that small towns in the rural places aren't racist backwaters.
Okay. I think that I don't need a statement of them saying, oh, well, it actually is a crisis and our heart goes out to those border towns and blah, blah, blah. I think that it is not a giant leap of faith to say that the mentality that leads to putting up that implies that there are people that think that these illegal immigrants aren't good people, or that's what the implication is, saying all people are welcome here, that there are some places that don't welcome those people. That's why, otherwise, what's the utility of that phrase?
But Rob, it just is the case that there are places where there's hatred of illegal immigrants. That's true.
Like where?
Sorry. Do you accept that there are people in this country who hate illegal immigrants?
Right, but are there places?
The people exist in places.
Where? Give
Presumably.
me a place.
All over the country, right? I mean,
well, again, like, you're going to fall into the same criticism.
When I say places, I wasn't trying to I was not trying to say that there's a propensity in any given area for that kind of thought. I wasn't making an affirmative claim of that kind. But all I'm saying is it is not inconsistent to say you should welcome these people, and these border towns that are whatever should not be maligned. They should be. You could say something like those border towns should be accepting and more accommodating of the immigrants, but they should also not be maligned. Or to say something, and also it is a crisis. It's not inconsistent. I think it would be weird for you to say that and be not okay with accepting immigrants of your own. But I don't think there's anything that should be implied from "don't hate immigrants" to border towns are racist backwaters, or it's not a crisis. There's just no logical connection there.
I think that it is it's reasonable to derive that the people that are, sort of putting out that material are implying that there are places, not just people, but places, the places that are dealing and complaining about the problem of illegal immigration. And the prominent places that are complaining about that are the places that are overwhelmed. I think that's where that statement comes, because you see politicians, you see areas that are saying, my God, this is a crisis, we're being overwhelmed. And the implication of those sorts of, what I would consider sort of virtue signaling, hollow virtue signaling comments are like, not here. We won't engage in that. We're not going to act like it's a problem. Here, everyone is welcome. And it's like, okay, well, people are coming that want to be welcome. Now, I will say real briefly, we can continue down this thought, but this is sort of a red herring, because none of this is the real criticism that I'm levying at you. I think you're wrong on this position. But the starking thing that I think is just beyond the pale is separate from this argument, and that's the argument that you made in defense of this, that they just didn't have the resources. Maybe they didn't have the resources.
No,
That's
no,
the
no.
argument that's so absurd that it just defies
Hang on a second.
credulity.
Well, let's talk about that next. I want to finish on this, and then
Okay.
we can get right into that.
Okay.
Um, all I'm saying on this part of it is there are many places that accept illegal immigrants in this country. There are a lot of illegal immigrants in Democrat-run cities all over the country. Very recently, Mayor Eric Adams of New York City, now you know what he's been saying about about non-citizens. You know what the city of New York, and indeed the state of New York, is calling. They're calling it a crisis in New York. They've taken tens of thousands of non-citizens. It is the case that there are tons, millions of immigrants without status in the United States. What are the estimates? Like 11, 12 million, something like that, approaching.
Some estimates over 25 million, but yeah, between 10 and 25.
It's in the tens of millions,
Yep.
correct?
Yep.
They are spread out in the country, and there are absolutely some and concentrations on the borders, right? That's true. That just is true. There are comparable levels in Democrat-run places, and there are differences between how places treat those immigrants. I'm not going to sit here and say that, anyone is. I'm not going to accuse anyone of racism right now as we speak here, because I don't have the statements right now to make that accusation. I'm not prepared to make that accusation. But there's nothing inconsistent about saying one approach should be preferred over the other. And so, I don't think that you should. I think you wouldn't like people necessarily reading things into statements from Trump, right? Like you often said the bleach thing, right? That it's the inject bleach is a red herring. He never actually said inject bleach, and you've explained how people have interpreted that comment in a way that you think is unfair. And they should be given the benefit of the doubt as much as possible to Trump on that comment, on the both sides comment, all that stuff, right? That Scott Adams talks about, right? His hoaxes. Those instances, right? If you're expecting that kind of parsing, and maybe we should expect that kind of parsing and that kind of good faith, which I think people should be given good faith on statements and taking them literally and in their context. Okay. Are you going to imply from a statement of let's love immigrants to, oh, we have a particular hatred of your policies somewhere? Or I don't think that it follows necessarily, and it's a leap. That's all I'm saying on this issue. I'll give you the last word, and then we can move on to the facts and resources.
No, I think that it's not a leap. It's not in the same way. It's not someone who makes a claim that plausibly you could follow the claim and understand that, the bleach claim that he never said to drink bleach. That's just. It didn't happen, right? And the people that say that, or the people that said he said Nazis were good people, it didn't happen. We could look, and not only did it not literally happen, because you could read the transcript and it didn't happen, but in context of what he's saying, you could understand, oh, it makes sense that this didn't happen because what he's saying. That's completely different than the context we're talking here. While it's true, and you understand this, even in cases where you have to prove something beyond a reasonable doubt, just because someone didn't say the direct words of something, it might be hard to prove that that's what they were implying. But certainly there have been cases when people didn't say the direct words. Maybe they didn't say, I want you to kill that person, but they said enough words that even though there is some possibility with ambiguity, that we can see beyond a reasonable doubt that that's what they implied. Similarly with this situation, right? I think you talked about places like New York and Eric Adams, right? They didn't declare it an emergency until we saw these conservative states start sending illegal immigrants there. And then once more, they folded. They were sanctuary until they were being shipped there, and now they said it's an emergency.
Whoa, they're still sanctuary.
What's that?
They're still sanctuary as far as I know.
Right, but it's an emergency. They declared a public health emergency, right?
So, yeah, but the sanctuary is
I know
that has to do with the compliance with federal immigration law.
I get that, right? But you see what I'm saying, right? They were parroting, and particularly in D.C., Muriel Bowser was parroting. Did I get that right? Is Bowser the one?
I think so. I think I was just in D.C. recently. I think I saw.
Call her up. Come on, Pisco. You don't have connections. Call them up. But no, she spoke quite frequently about the mistreatment of immigrants from Republicans and illegals, and and then as soon as they came to our doorstep, again it was, oh boy, this is a crisis, we can't handle this. So I don't think that I'm out of bounds saying that because the national conversation has been centered around sort of these border cities saying like, look, we're being overwhelmed, this is terrible, there's a crisis at the border, these numbers are unsustainable, et cetera, then the Democratic Party, that no doubt the people of Martha's Vineyard, and we can see overwhelmingly voted for, saying there is no crisis, like, oh, respect immigrants, love, and blah, 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 and they're great people and stuff like that. When there are signs put up that are not only parroting that, but seem, as I said, to say, if you're saying you're welcome here, you're saying because there are places you aren't, that it seems intuitive to say that most likely what they're referring to is those places that have been complaining about the situation. And I'm unaware of places that have been complaining about it other than the places that are facing the brunt of the overload of illegal immigration. So I don't think it's beyond the pale to say, it's hypocritical to say we value all humans, hate has no place here, we accept all humans, and then to only accept a pittance, 48, for less than 48 hours. I think that is hypocrisy. And if I could just say this real quick, even more importantly than this aspect of the hypocrisy, I think hypocrisy is important, but I think at the end of the day, what it shows is, well, then the Democrats are just flat wrong. Right? It is a crisis. There is a double standard going where it's like, well, we're expecting these border cities to accept the brunt of this, and we think it's perfectly reasonable for Martha's Vineyard to say, no, we can't accept it. Because that's the Democrat position. And so even beyond claims of double standards and hypocrisy, it's important to point out that the Democrats are just factually wrong on that. Would you agree with that?
Wrong on the crisis aspect of it?
Well, wrong on the crisis aspect, and also wrong to expect border towns with massive amounts of people, with less resources, to deal and to just shut up and deal with this, but to also think it's reasonable for wealthy areas like Martha's Vineyard to not even accept 50 people.
I'm not so convinced that the state of play is that DHS is making a concerted effort to concentrate them in the border towns. I think that the immigrants who are in the border towns are likely there because they're on the border, and to the extent that they're capturing or arresting these individuals, they're almost by policy shipping them off to urban centers, very often because they're bringing them to family members who they're claiming here, so they're and also going to be showing up to their immigration proceedings, and having a place to send notices and shit like that, presumably because they're in removal proceedings, and so they're shipping them off to places where DHS has resources, right? And I don't see that, like, to the extent that it's a federal government approach, that it's one that's targeted towards the border towns. There's a border town problem because that's where they are, but I don't see it as an intentionality, right, unless you think we're not enforcing the immigration laws to the extent that we should be.
Well, that's true, but it goes beyond that, right? Because again, it is the official stance of the Biden administration and Mayorkas and John Pierre that have said there is no crisis at the border, right? And so it's difficult. You can see the frustration if you're a border town when you see people that are well-to-do, like Martha's Vineyard, you have 1% of the consequences you're living on a daily basis on this particular issue, and people say, well, we just don't have the resources. Sorry, we just can't take care of you. Sorry, we'll send you off to this military base. And to see that being accepted as like, oh, yes, that's a reasonable situation, while at the same time to be told that you think this is a crisis because you're being overwhelmed. It's not. It's not a crisis, so just suck it up. That's sort of the double standard of the Democratic Party.
I'm interested in those statements. Right, like I know Kamala Harris was Kate. I don't know why Democrats can't nominate people who can talk. It's so frustrating. Like,
I'll sell out. Give me money. I'll run as a Dem. Yeah.
No, it's like I'm going to be honest. There's a lot of frustration on my part that I feel like we don't have a lot of talent, and talent isn't being developed in the Democratic Party. I know there's a big controversy about saying Democrat Party now, but I don't really care. But look at the policies. The policies are, the DHS is 100% enforcing immigration law in this country. They're 100% putting people into expedited removal proceedings. They're instituting increased like remain in Mexico style policies for Haitian refugees and Venezuelan migrants, I should say.
But that's recent with Venezuela, right? That was after this Martha's Vineyard stunt, correct?
That was, I believe, after the Martha's
Right.
Vineyard thing.
Go figure.
I'm not,
48
again,
Venezuelans showed up to Martha's Vineyard, and now all of a sudden it was like, oh, geez, yeah, this is a
but you're
crisis.
implying causality there. The reality is like there's been a shit ton of migrants from Venezuela and from Haiti because of political and largely political things that are happening in those countries.
Yeah, if it looks like a duck, at some point I'm going to say it's a duck. And I understand this is an argument I've dealt with Dylan Burns earlier today too, where it's like, well, you can't definitively prove. Like, for example, he was talking about the marijuana executive order that Joe Biden was like convenient that it's right before an election, et cetera, et cetera. Like, yeah, I'm sorry. Everyone who's being reasonable understands that the reason that they had this policy on Venezuela and the stay in Mexico from Venezuela illegals is because there's an election coming up and they got pie on their face because they realized there was a big national story where finally some wealthy left-wingers had to deal with illegal immigrants from that area. So they're like, oh, geez, maybe now we should do something. But when the numbers were astronomical, incredibly high for months prior, they kept saying, what crisis? Everything's being taken care of. It's great. So yeah, I know that you could make the plausible deniability argument. They're like, well, we don't know that exactly that's why it happened. It's why it happened. We all know. That's why they issued that policy.
So it's your position they issued the Venezuela policy because of Martha's Vineyard stunt?
Yes, because it showed that when you saw places, not just Martha's Vineyard, but also New York and D.C., when you saw these places where sort of socialite left-wingers tend to preside, that all of a sudden was dealing with the consequences of their positions, they said, we don't like this. This is a crisis. And so now that their constituents were being affected, the Biden administration, particularly when an election's coming up, was like, oh boy, we better temporarily do something to relieve this burden. So we'll go back to the stay in Mexico policy that we decried.
I mean, I don't know what it would take for, like, what's the burden of proof on that? I mean, it just.
But again, I'm uninterested. You have to accept it from my perspective, right? Like, it becomes frustrating. And I think the more interesting argument I can't wait to get into is the Russiagate stuff. So hopefully we move there soon. But again, at some point you have to say, like, you can say this about everything. There is, like, literally everything if you take it to an extreme. There's a question of if free will exists or we're in a simulation. And so you can always go ad reductum and just be like.
Reasonability. No.
Right.
The policy is, it is a reasonability analysis. And you look at all the circumstances, you look at context. You're never going to find a smoking gun. Right. You're never going to find a memo from Mallorca saying, hey, Biden, by the way, this looked really, really bad for us. And so we're going to institute
you might find that memo. You might say, I mean, there could conceivably be a memo.
Reliably find that. You cannot reliably find that.
Well, listen, it doesn't have to be ridiculous. You could find a memo from Ron Klain, for example, saying like, listen, our constituents are starting to get upset about this. Maybe we need to do something, to change this going into the election because this could be an issue that affects us. That's entirely reasonable. It would be difficult to get that document. But,
right. Like that would be democracy working in your mind. And like, but Biden, under your mind, right? Like that's him listening to stimuli and changing behavior in a way that like isn't he worse if he weren't to change that policy? Like you think he's better or worse for having changed it to what it is? Surely responding to constituent outcry would be a positive.
Well, in a sense, yes, but that's not the question to ask. The question
whether it's political. Oh, yeah. I mean, every conceivable act is political.
No. That's not just to eat. Or the question is, why, when people that aren't really his base were suffering a far more magnanimous problem involving, or a problem of far, not magnanimous, a problem of far greater magnitude in the same realm of this problem of illegal immigration. Why was it ignored for 2 years? And not only ignored, but told it's not a crisis. It's just not a crisis. It's not a crisis. And yet, when people that do support him suffered a small fraction of that, he immediately jumped. That's the problem. It's like, it's someone who wants the crisis of illegal immigration dealt with. Yeah, I guess it's good that once it was thrown on his supporters back stairs, or, that all of a sudden he was like, well, shit, I got to do something. Yes, the policy is better now to have them remain in Mexico. But what it shows is that we knew that it was a crisis all along, and the Biden administration knew, and they fucking lied about it. And they didn't care until people that they supported suffered even a pittance of the consequence of it.
Tell me the lie in the following statements. Obama deported more people than Bush ever did.
True.
Obama deported more people than Trump ever did.
Probably true, though not sure.
But at least in 8 years, right? I mean, he had 8 years.
Well, yeah, that's definitely probably true then. Yeah.
Leftists excoriate Obama for that aspect of his immigration policy, that he removed tons of people.
Some, but yeah, that's certainly true of some.
That Obama also separated families.
Mm-hmm. Kids in cages, Obama. Yep.
That in fact it is DOJ policy when you're that it has been for a while when you're doing criminal prosecutions of people for criminal immigration violations, not for the kids not to be in criminal facilities. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. So did Obama ignore the problem of illegal immigration?
Well, to an extent, right? Yes, but so did Bush, right? Like there was a problem that he certainly. I think that there has been a problem with illegal immigration that's been going on for decades, right? That's been largely ignored. There are band-aids placed on it, but I think that the problem and the scope of it has been ignored by Republicans and Democrats, going back to Bush Sr.
Okay,
really when we say like Bush Jr.
I will have you know, as someone who's like a very left wing, Obama and Biden, at least by the left-wing people who want more amnesty and more visas things, our laws are they're very generous in some regards, at least with like blood familial relationships and certain categories of visas that I think you would be agree with, like if you're a traffic victim and you're given police information on how to, those kinds of visas, sure, they can be generous and they can do all that kind of stuff. But for all other people, they are very harsh. If you overstay your visa in this country, you are subject. If you overstay by 6 months or more, you're subject to a 3-year ban in this country. And if you overstay by more than a year, you're looking at a 10-year ban from admission into the country, not just becoming whatever. If you leave the country, you can't come back for 10 years. There are incredibly difficult aspects that are federal law passed by Clinton, right? Clinton massively restricted the level of immigration in this country. And I will tell you, right, I think the Democrats for years have been trying to be appeal and look harsh on immigration, at least during election years, and during their terms, they've been huge disappointments to the left. Huge. I mean, you ask people what their views are on like Obama and the Clinton years for immigration. They do not. They see DACA, right, as a saving light for Obama. That's the one aspect that they agree with. But guess what? You probably deep down agree with DACA. I think you have said that, like DACA, sure, it shouldn't go through that method. It should be passed through federal law,
right?
But you at
can't
least agree
punish children through things that they didn't.
Right. So like on those policies, right? People point to like the left is just radical on immigration. At least in federal policies I've seen in the last years, oh my God, that's not been the case, at least leading up to Biden. That's the story that I have.
Okay, but listen, we're broadening the scope of the conversation. We could talk for hours about whether Republicans and Democratic administrations were effectively enforcing immigration policy. For example, you talk about serious consequences to overstaying visas, to being here illegally, being undocumented, and yet you can see that we have anywhere between 11 million and 25 million illegals. So even if there are laws on the books, clearly those laws are A, either intentionally not being enforced, or B, that there's not enough investigation to be able to enforce those laws. Otherwise, there wouldn't be 25 million people here, or 11 million.
I just think it's futile. I'm at this. First of all, the big wave of illegal immigration, I think that happened. I don't. This is a big wave of immigration that we're seeing right now, actually. In fact, but
like the biggest.
Yeah. Well, at least in terms of month by month, I'm not so sure in terms of like the year by year stuff. I know, but there are some big waves of immigration happening right now and recently, and I'm sure we could look at a fucking thing. Although I'm always like skeptical about the illegal immigration numbers, because like at the end of the day, I'm like, how do you actually know? But I know that there are some pretty widely used and respected estimates. but regardless of that fact, it is really hard. Our border is super long. Wall or no wall, right? Like enforcement. I think DHS is like, in terms of raw numbers, the largest law enforcement agency in the entire country with by far the biggest budget in the country. You know, like I
But again,
they
like I hate to cut you off here because I'd like to
yeah,
get to the
no,
Russiagate stuff. But again, I think
yeah.
it's unnecessarily broadening the scope. A conversation of, well, were we having policies that left wingers thought were too harsh on illegal immigration? And is the nature of so many illegals being here because it's difficult? That's a separate conversation from in the now, right? Was because the way we got to this was
Let's go Martha's
Biden
Vineyard.
ignoring the crisis in these border towns when he was adamantly saying there is no crisis, while at the same time then basically declaring that there's some level of crisis that means a change in policy, the return in Mexico policy,
Yeah,
after 48 illegals got sent to
yeah.
Martha's
Oh,
Vineyard.
okay, okay,
So I don't think
let's
Obama's policies have anything to do with this whatsoever when
no,
we're
no.
talking about this
All I'm
situation.
saying is, all I'm saying is, if you follow mainstream Democrats up to Biden, let's go at least up to Biden. I don't think that you see this like fucking I'll do what everybody says. Like they might talk a nicer game, but there's not like this whole like, and there's a perception they're going to be nicer because guess what? They are nicer in some things. They're definitely easing on certain asylum stuff. They definitely make immigrants' lives easier in between them and like Trump, because Trump, guess what, is one of the harshest fucking in terms of those kinds of policies. So I'm not going to lie to you and be like they're the same policies. One of the reasons I voted for Biden was because I knew he would be less harsh on immigration stuff than Trump. That was a selling point for me, because I have different values than you, and obviously all that shit. Now let's bring it to Martha's Vineyard, right? Biden might who the like who like obviously it matters what the president says. It sets the tone for the country. It sets like what the priorities are. Like I'm not gonna sit here and be like it doesn't matter what the president says, but like Biden has enforced immigration law this entire time. If you voted for Biden, it doesn't mean you don't want to enforce immigration law. Biden has continued to use Title 42 in immigration proceedings. He's been asked, or at least now he's trying to revoke it or whatever. But at least in the initial part of his term, he was doing it. He maintained the reign in Mexico for a long time. Now he's implementing different policies. He has not just granted large amounts of amnesty or temporary protected status to different groups. He rescinded a bunch of immigration orders from Trump, and I think he's been a significant departure from Trump. But it's not like he is implementing this fucking no holds barred amnesty kind of. It's lessened, a lessening of tight immigration standards. I would agree
I
with
think
that,
this
but
is.
it's not a it's a change. It's a subtle change.
But Pisco,
It's
I
not an
think this
uber.
is all a red herring to the issue I had. Again, and let me just be. I could talk to you all night. Like I could say, well, the problem is in the way that those things are enforced. So, for example, there are whistleblowers from ICE that say that they feel that they're intentionally being, handicapped. That even though these laws are on the book, that they're being encouraged to let people cross. In addition to the legal or the illegals that were apprehended, we have I think 600,000 year to year that were known getaways and an untold number of unknown getaways. So it's a problem. The enforcement mechanisms aren't as robust as you might suggest, in my opinion, but all of it's irrelevant. Like it's all irrelevant to just, and it's complicating this
Wait,
very
can I tell you
simple.
why it's relevant? The next sentence will tie it to Martha's Vineyard,
Okay.
because the reason why I'm going down this diatribe is the whole rationale for attributing the things you're attributing to Martha's Vineyard is that they voted for people like Biden. And my perspective is like, oh, ask the fucking people on the border whether they love Biden. Like they're all. If you Lauren Southern published a documentary, and I don't think it's like the greatest documentary ever, but it's actually funny because she has interviews with some people who are like, what do you think about Biden versus Trump? Like Biden didn't do shit for us. Like that's their perspective. A lot of the borders, and I'm sure you've heard stories like that where migrants are saying like we thought Biden was going to do and like it didn't. And so I'm not so sure that you can attribute everything you want to attribute to whatever groups you want to attribute them to just because they voted for Biden or because they have a fucking flyer.
But it's two
That's the
different.
only. Yeah.
It's two different. I'm not saying just because they voted for Biden. I gave the reasons earlier, but we're conflating. Like when I said, well, we can at least agree that the Democrats and the Biden administration were full of shit when they were publicly saying this wasn't a crisis, and they changed their mind once their constituents were affected with or their base was affected with sort of a
Yeah,
small
Democrat
fraction
messaging.
of the problem.
Democrats' messaging sucks. They lost Virginia, bro. Like I don't know what to tell you. Like,
It's not the messaging. It's that when it's people that they don't perceive as their base suffering, they're like, we don't give a fuck. It's not a problem. And then when a small fraction of that problems for people that are their base, they're like, oh, all of a sudden this is a problem. We need to change policy. That's all I'm saying.
I mean, okay, that's your perception. I think that like, and I want to get to resources, and then we can get to Russiagate. Sound good?
Yeah.
All right. So I guess I'll give you the last word on that. I think that like it's more likely, and from my perspective, that it's the thousands of immigrants that are causing the change in policy that as opposed to the 48 in Martha's Vineyard.
Let me ask you this. If that's the case, I hate to beleaguer the point, but let me just say this. So then if I was to look it up, if your theory is to hold true, then we would expect to see the month-to-month numbers in this past month to surpass in a significant way previous month-to-month numbers, right? If something was the impetus for this change, and it wasn't just, oh, now they're in Democratic areas. If it was the amount...
you can't assume that. You can't assume that because government has a lag time, and they don't respond perfectly to... Like you just can't assume that. I think that's something that's evidence for you, right? It would be if let's say that numbers went down month to month, and in your perception was the crisis or whatever was getting easier. I wouldn't say that it's evidence that that's not evidence for you, right? That could be something like, listen, clearly the problem's lessening. The only thing that mattered to them is the media, right? That would be your point, right? Do you hear what I'm saying, or am I not making any sense?
But wait, like, so then you're like, well, we can't look at that because that would be true, all things given, but there's a lag time. So then how big's the lag time?
I'm saying it's not dispositive evidence. That's what I should. Dispositive
again,
meaning it doesn't decide the case.
But we're talking like we already said that the standard is reasonability, right? So like I'm looking at the numbers now, right? So we see the month-to-month numbers, right? Like so we could go back. We go back to March, 220,000. April, 230,000. May, 240,000. June, 207. July, 200. August, 204. September, 227. So even if there was a lag, how long will we expect that lag? We see these numbers are insane way back in March.
Yeah, right. So they're stable, right? I mean, they're large, they're robust, and they're stable across time. It looks like, right? And
they're increasing. It's a record number of apprehensions at the border.
All right. So then, why would your intuition like all these things are linked, right? Increased number of immigrants leads to increased news stories. Increased news stories leads to increased pressure on the administration. Increased pressure on the administration leads to changes in policy. I don't understand what like
again. I think that it's just like the nature of the plausible deniability that you're going is just it's surreal. Like the far clearer, more likely explanation was these numbers, these border towns were being overwhelmed. The Biden administration wasn't inept to it. They knew what was going on. They absolutely did, and we know that these border towns, some of them ran by Democratic mayors, were begging the Biden administration to do something. So it wasn't as if Bill Malugin knew and the Fox News crew knew and a bunch of people like me knew, but somehow the Biden administration didn't know. They knew that these towns were being overwhelmed and chose to say repeatedly, not a crisis, not a crisis, not a crisis. And then at the exact moment, coincidentally, we're supposed to believe that they started shipping these illegals off to Democratic strongholds like New York, D.C., Martha's Vineyard. They said, well, now it's a problem. And I'm supposed to believe, no, it just happened that was the magic tipping point number. I don't buy that. I don't.
No, that's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is increased quote unquote problem leads to increase in media attention, leads to pressure. And I'm not convinced that what's tipping the point for President Biden is like what the fuck's going on in Democrat strongholds. They're Democrat strongholds. You know, what he cares about are swing areas, right? What he cares about is maintaining power.
They might lose in New York. So it is a swing area.
In New York State.
Right.
First of all, I think it'll be close for comfort. But I
we'll see.
But regardless, right? Like, and also Zeldin only recently gained in the polls, I feel like. And this policy was instituted.
Right. And one of the things you see is only recently, right? You see New Yorkers saying this is a huge fucking problem. along with other things like crime. And so it would, maybe that would be a reason that Biden would have an incentive to be like, oh shit, we better patch this up before the. Regardless, I'm disinterested in the topic for
Okay,
now.
let's go to resources. Then go to Russiagate.
Resources, real quick, right? That was the real issue. So we spent a lot of time.
Like, I just think it's reasonable that that I think it's likely that this was the off season for Martha's Vineyard. That these people don't really want to they can't force private residents to, even if the private residents vote for Democrats, they can't force these private residents to open up their areas. They certainly can't force private businesses to do the same, right? Whoever the government actors are, and so to the extent that that there's standardized run facilities on some government fucking base, to the extent that they're given the choice to stay or go. I don't really think it's a huge deal and a sign of hypocrisy that whoever was in charge of Martha's Vineyard, the local government of Martha's Vineyard, is taking up Governor Baker's efforts, and I think the National Guard's efforts to bring them there. That seems totally logical to me.
No, and this is where you go off the rails, right? Like, this is such a meandering bullshit explanation. Like, even the explanation you're giving is counterintuitive. For example, it's the off season. Well, that means there's more empty buildings.
There's less people.
Let me ask you this question: you already said you were in Model UN in high school? Were you in any other extracurriculars, band or anything like that?
Oh, yeah, I was in soccer all throughout high school. Played rugby.
Yeah, cool. So you probably traveled, like you took a bus and you traveled.
Sure did.
Other schools. Imagine that your bus broke down in Martha's Vineyard. Are you telling me that they would be like, well, fuck, we're filled up. We can't accommodate you 30 people. Is that what you're telling me?
The kind of services that these people need are different than a varsity soccer team.
Well, like, there's no hotel that has like a continental breakfast.
No, they gave him breakfast.
That's right, they did. And the idea that they didn't have enough to give him breakfast the next day is fucking ludicrous. You know it, and I know it.
Well, what do you think the difference is? I mean, be honest with me. What do you think the difference is between those two cases? Can you name some difference? The differences between those two cases. Why don't I just save us the time? I'll just tell you some differences. I'm not gonna play this game. So, number one, in addition to the resources, the beds, the accommodations, other services connecting with family, legal services, those are all things that are not necessarily in the expertise of Martha's Vineyard, who, as you stated, is not used. Wasn't even given a fucking notice or heads up, according to them, that this was happening. Additionally,
real quick on that note, just take it issue by issue. How far was the bus ride to the camp they ended up being replaced to?
I'm sure hours.
Was it?
Or how long?
I thought it was 20 minutes.
Oh, it was 20 minutes?
That's what I could be wrong. I thought that's what it was. I didn't think this was a trek across the state.
Wasn't it near Boston? I thought it was at Cape Cod or Boston.
I don't know. I don't have the.
I don't.
But
remember.
Nonetheless, the idea that it was impossible to get legal services brought to them is nonsense. Particularly some of the wealthiest people in the country.
Is it an island? Hang on a second. Whatever. I'll listen. In addition, the kids who are on the varsity soccer team, they have money. Right. They have money.
But that's the whole point. The hypocrisy nature of this isn't, right, well, that, the government can't compel by force, blah, blah, blah. That's not the hypocrisy nature. The hypocrisy nature is people that are incredibly wealthy that say all are welcome here, saw people in a crisis, right? I've already talked about what I thought the implication was. And the question is whether or not they had resources to do more than what they did. Yes, like my small town would be able to put up 40, 50 people for more than fucking 2 days. It would be able to do it. And we're dirt poor, living paycheck to paycheck. And we could fucking do it without much of an issue. And the idea that one of the wealthiest communities in this country just they had what they had. They couldn't gives no more. It's bullshit. It's just bullshit, and we all know it. And that's the argument that's so frustrating with you. No. And even Counterpoints knew it when I brought it up to him. He's like, yeah, you just sort of laugh at the stupidity of that. Because everyone who's being objective knows it's a stupid argument, and I don't understand why you would make it.
I don't even know if you're... so the argument that's ridiculous, it's so ridiculous on its face, laughable, is that Martha's Vineyard didn't have, quote-unquote, resources, correct?
That's what you said.
It depends on which resources you're talking about and who. Sorry, you're shaking your head already.
See, you see me then, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've been able to see it. Um, so who has the resources matters too, right?
Sure.
You could say New York City has a lot of a lot of resources. New York City has a lot. The city has some resources. They have a big budget. NYP, the fucking whatever. The private equity people in New York have a lot of money. The billionaires and billionaires row have a lot of money. What is the identity of the thing that you're talking about that has a lot of resources?
The
Who
people of
owns the
Martha's
resources
Vineyard,
in Martha's
the
Vineyard?
peoples of Martha's Vineyard. That's who I'm
The
talking
people.
about. I
Okay,
don't.
that's very easy to say. The people of Martha's Vineyard. Who is that?
Again, this is such like you're doing the equivalence of sort of this ad reductum absurdum, right? When basically you're doing the equivalent of saying like define chair, and it's like, oh, okay, well,
No,
what a
I'm
chair.
not,
That's
bro.
what you're doing. Like we know, you know what I'm talking about. The people on average, are there certain people that don't have means there? Yes. Are there other people that are above the means of the average there? Yes. I guess that's sort of how average incomes work. So if the average income or earnings there is $80,000 per household, which is higher than the places in these border towns that we're having by a substantial amount. Is it true that some of the people there might only be making 40,000? That's true. That would be offset
You're
by
not even
people that were
understanding what I'm
making.
saying.
No, I do understand. So when
What
I
am I
say the
saying then?
people, I'm saying as a collective, these group of people seem to embrace the ideology that all are welcome here, and they seem to embrace the ideology that they would take care of people and they were a sanctuary. And those people, as a collective, have more resources than the places they're able to hold. Not just like 10 more people, not just 20 more, but to a power of like 10 or 20 more. So instead of 50 people, like 5,000 people, like 10,000. And instead of 2 days, like 100 days, like 200 days. People with less able to provide for people, a far greater amount of people for a far greater amount of time. And it's fucking bullshit. And we could parse down that, like, well, maybe who exactly had these resources? Was it this person? Maybe all the money in town's owned by the one Trump supporter, and that's why the average income there looks good, and that guy doesn't like immigrants. It's bullshit, and we all know it. And it just, what it does is, to me, and you might
But you're on
disagree.
the,
Let me finish real quick. You might disagree, and the people that follow you might disagree. But I'm just telling you, it's disappointing to me because when I see that, it goes part and parcel to when we are going to start arguing about corruption and double standards in the FBI. Because I see, even on this ridiculous situation, the lengths you're willing to go to make excuses for an issue that I don't even know why it's a hill you're dying on, because you basically already said it's a horse of peace anyways. This issue isn't that important. So I don't understand why you're making yourself look ludicrous for this issue that you could just easily say, yeah, it's fucked up. They appeared to be,
I mean,
they
I don't
definitely have
really
the resources,
care.
but
I don't really care about your characterization with respect
well,
to
I
like,
know.
it looks ridiculous to people. People don't take it. Like, that's not the argument, right? Stay in the argument. Like, if you let your argument do the talking, right?
Sure.
You can plant the flag at the end, at the start. That's fine, and be like, this makes you look ridiculous. But that's not the argument. Isn't does it make me look ridiculous at the moment? Right now, we're having the argument, and so when you say, well, as a collective, some of the states with the highest per capita income have had huge budget problems, right? The states themselves, the identity of the entity that is doing the paying is not the identity of all the value and economic activity that exists in a given place. Just because if you count the number of rich people and their assets on this island, you get some astronomical amount, does not mean that you're going to overcome the collective action problem inherent in the caring of these individuals. The people who are not there at the moment, who are fucking away from Martha's Vineyard, and who they're the rich people the rich Democrats who want to pay more in taxes, but they don't want to actually donate their money to do it. They're going to still try to get through the tax loopholes and all that stuff. And you're acting as though they're this one disambiguated thing, when it's not the case. It's just not the case. Just because you have a rich area doesn't mean that the fiscal or the political entity that's in charge of making decisions has money. It just isn't the case.
It's ludicrous. It's a ludicrous argument to try to imply that we have to pretend that just because people there are overwhelmingly rich compared to most people in this country, that somehow they've just mismanaged their budget or they don't have money. And second, it's irrelevant anyways, because I'm not saying that the Hippocratic nature of it is that the government of Martha's Vineyard, the local government, didn't provide resources. I'm saying that the people of Martha's Vineyard, who you can't argue don't have money, and even if you say not all of them, there are certainly, you would be forced to agree, a substantial amount of people in Martha's Vineyard that no doubt are people of means, that no doubt have been the people that prided themselves in being a sanctuary area. And those people, real quick, those people of their good-natured charity could have provided for more than 24 hours or 48 hours for 50 people
there.
without the government. I want to move on to the Russia topic. I'm happy to leave it there.
Can I have the last word then?
Sure.
Or you can respond, actually. I just want
No,
more
you can
word.
have the last word, and we're fucking an hour and 20 minutes in, and we're still talking about what should be a 5-minute talking point. But
well, you and I can talk for 5 hours, and it goes.
That's
goes
true.
Whatever, right? Well, I will just say, right, with respect to this particular situation, what you're saying is, it is the case that I wanted Martha's Vineyard people to donate their money, their own private money. I wanted them to donate their own private money. I wanted them to give free services for indefinitely. That's what I wanted from them. Because even if it's the case that they had budget problems with their with whoever the government entity was, and what I'm going to say, I don't mean budget problems. The budget could have been managed appropriately. They don't have many expenses because the people are rich and they don't have to provide many services. All they do is clean the beaches and all that stuff. It's not the case that they had to mismanage the budget to say that they're not ready and prepared to accommodate these people. But what you're asking for is for the people to privately maintain these individuals indefinitely. That's what you're asking for. And if they didn't do that, they failed in your eyes.
Yeah, they're hypocrites. People that virtue signaled about sanctuary that have insane amounts of money that couldn't afford to put people up for more than 2 days are fucking hypocrites. I will guarantee you this, Pisco. In my small fucking town, if 48 people needed help, the people of this town could band together and provide for them more than 48 hours. And I'll bet you to a fucking person that we make less money than almost every single person living in Martha's Vineyard. It's hypocritical. They're virtue signaling assholes. And, the argument that I was having with you was your argument that they don't have money for the resources is stupid. I'm ready to move on. You clearly disagree, but
I mean, I disagree that we should expect, or that it is hypocritical to, on the one hand, argue that the government should be doing the job about a certain thing, but wanting that to be handled through the government and being unwilling to indefinitely give your own private resources directly as opposed to indirectly through taxes. I don't think that's necessarily indicative of hypocrisy. These people are accommodated them through the government of Massachusetts, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which did provide for them and did do things which many states don't necessarily do. Went above and beyond with respect to them. You want to make the focus on Martha's Vineyard because, of course, that's useful for you. But do you have anything positive to say about the government of Massachusetts and how they handled the crisis?
It's irrelevant.
Crisis, right?
It's irrelevant to the conversation. Like, I don't know exactly. I know what they claimed they were going to do. I don't know exactly how it went down. Okay. I could say positive things about any government. I could say positive things about the government of Mexico that probably gave some sort, maybe free bread or something on the way through. I don't see why it's relevant. Okay. I'm done with the topic. I think that I've proven my point and what I want to get at. I wanted to talk about the Russiagate stuff somewhat. So these are the issues. Like when you talk about sort of, well, you're willing to admit Democrat failures in certain areas. I think that my leaning towards wanting to call out corruption in these institutions, I think that you share an inverse opinion that's almost equally important, maybe not quite as equally important, of your protecting these institutions as not being corrupt as I'm suggesting. And so it doesn't mean that just because you could say, well, I admit Biden did poor in this area, that doesn't prove that you're being a partisan hack when it comes to defense of perceived double standards at the FBI. And so one of the ones we haven't talked about recently is Russiagate and the idea that we had spying on Trump's campaign and his presidency team based on unverified opposition research paid by Hillary Clinton's team that was sourced by a Russian national who was a suspected Russian spy, and that was used to spy on Trump's team. That's There's
Yeah.
not a question that this occurred. And my question is, when this was occurring and I was talking about it and I did talk
Hmm.
with you, you didn't seem to really believe that that was occurring, or you didn't think it was a big deal. And I don't think that
Yeah. Let's
you've
talk about
really
it.
expressed. Yeah. So let's do it. Yeah.
Okay. So the claim here is, as I understand it, to make sure I understand, that it was clearly corrupt to seek a FISA warrant and renew the FISA warrant on Carter Page. And that act alone and the acts that led up to the seeking and the renewing of the FISA warrants is the one of the biggest signs of corruption in the Department of Justice, correct?
The word alone, I take umbrage with, right? That act alone. I think that you can't look at it in a vacuum. For example, let me ask you this question. Will you
Yeah.
admit that the IG report showed that at the top brass and leadership of the FBI that there was bias against Donald Trump?
There was political animus against Donald Trump. I would say bias, a general bias amongst uh, Lisa Page and Agent Peter Strzok, but there was not a determination made as to it affecting any critical decision.
Right, but I don't think it was just Page and Strzok. I think that it also spoke to other people and top brass like Comey,
I mean,
McCabe,
you mentioned a
Rosenstein.
couple like weird staffing decisions that were made,
Well,
right?
no.
As
That
well as
you're conflating two things. We're not
okay,
talking about whether or not the bias influenced their decision. We're just asking whether or not there was bias, right? So, for example, it could be conceivable that perhaps you'll get a job where you have some sort of oversight, and you might have incredible bias for one side versus another, but that doesn't necessarily mean it'll affect your job. But the
yeah.
bias could still exist, right?
Yeah, I guess it means it depends on like what you mean by bias. If what you mean by bias, usually when people say bias, what I'm hearing is bias in a way that's like if you call a referee biased, right? You're saying it's affecting his. I feel like you're saying it's affecting his job,
Well,
right?
but again, it doesn't matter what I'm saying. Like you used a word that I think was even more antagonistic, which was political animus, right? Like I'm just saying the IG report makes it quite clear that the top brass, not just Lisa Page and Peter Strzok, exhibited that. Let me put it as charitable as I can. Exhibited a preference to wanting the outcome of the election to go to Hillary Clinton and not Donald Trump.
Uh, who's higher than Struck and Page?
Comey, Rosenstein, McCabe, Kevin Kleinsmith. Shit. Let me think of some of the other names. The guy that was the point man, I can't remember his name right now, for Igor Dushenko, that was supposed to be looking into him. There were all sorts of people that were, it's not just the IG report. We could also see from the actions of people like McCabe and Rosenstein and Comey afterwards that it's clear they didn't like Donald Trump and they liked Hillary Clinton.
Like I think it's clear afterwards that Comey fucking hates Trump.
Right.
And
That's all I'm asking. There's no need to be contentious on this issue. That's all I'm asking. So
but part of that the time when this matters. A lot of the reason why Comey fucking hates Trump has to do with acts after this shit happens, and has to do with Trump's presidency, and has to do with after Comey's firing. And so
I don't think so. I think that the lead up to it, for example, Comey took copious amounts of notes and seems to, in his notes, indicate at an early onset that he had some dislike or distrust of Donald Trump. So I don't think that this only happened after he was fired.
He ain't the only one, bro. Trump has a reputation.
That's right. That's right, Pisco. He's not the. Thank you for proving my point. That's exactly my point. I'm not saying whether the bias is warranted or not. Maybe Trump's a very fucking unlikable guy. I'm just saying that it seems that the top brass had a preference. This is beyond dispute.
No. What I was trying to say, that he ain't the only one. I was referring to his need to take notes about conversations with Trump, because Trump does not. But why are you acting befuddled?
I'm not. You're proving my point.
Okay.
That's exactly, yes. That's what I'm saying. You're just saying, well, the bias was warranted.
But hang on. That doesn't mean that. No, stop. That doesn't mean that he. First of all, when you say bias, I'm assuming you're referring to type 1 bias, which is I politically support someone, right? That's what you're referring to. Okay. I do not think that in the early days, Comey's conduct, or that we have indications that at that time, at least from the IG report, that he favored Trump or sorry, Clinton over Trump. Do we
All
have
right.
any evidence
All
of
right.
that?
All right. Well, I guess we'll just skip that part and
Wait,
we'll
no,
say,
no, no, hang on, hang
okay,
on.
no evidence that the top brass had a political preference. They were
What's that?
politically neutral. Got it. I'm not.
Come
I'm
on,
not
this
gonna
is
like. Come on, dude. I mean, it's fucking. I've been streaming for 20 hours. You're asking me to go through the IG report and find the evidence of when they say that we did find that there was a preference from these agents at the top level.
no,
That
no,
the
Comey.
preference.
We're talking about Comey. We're talking
Right,
about
and
Comey.
I think it mentioned Comey in there. I don't know. I'm not going to sift through the 800-page
All right, all right,
IG
all right.
report or
Let's
whatever.
just say, well, there were some members of the DOJ that that had that preference for Clinton. Yes.
Okay, so the point I'm saying is then when we look at the most stark example, I think, of obvious malfeasance, corruption, or incredible ineptitude from the FBI, this would be the first thing that comes to mind. And it's so egregious and so against what the FBI should be doing and stand for that I think that easily, like 95%, if not higher, the chance that this wasn't just stupid incompetence, that the FBI didn't know they weren't supposed to verify information before they used it to spy on a presidential campaign is so beyond the pale that it seems evident, given that we could see that many of them exhibited a preference for Hillary Clinton, that this, in fact, is a situation where we could say that there was corruption at the FBI because they engaged in such malfeasance that it seems that it would almost have to be intentional.
Okay.
You disagree?
I do.
Okay, so let's go step by step. Do you
Let's go
agree
step by
with
step.
this factual assessment that the FBI used what they knew to be opposition research paid for by Hillary Clinton and the DNC? Do you agree with that? They used it for a FISA warrant.
Correct.
Do you agree that they knew that it was sourced by a Russian national?
I believe they knew at the time of the first warrant application.
Right. Do you acknowledge that after submitting that to get a FISA warrant, that they did not attempt to reach out to the subsources to attempt to verify the material until after the first time that they submitted the application for the warrant?
So far as publicly reported information, I believe that's correct.
Right. Do you agree that as a factual matter, it is the policy of the FBI before submitting evidence to obtain a FISA warrant that they have to make attempts to verify it?
It's where the rubber meets the road, Rob. It's where the rubber meets the road. This is where we talked about in our first conversation. Will you give me the space to talk?
Sure. I'm allowed to make facial gestures, but I'm listening.
You are allowed. Yeah. You are allowed.
20 hours. Go ahead.
I know. And by the way, compared to some of our conversations, this has been alarmingly mild.
Yeah, that's true. That's because of time.
Alarmingly calm.
If this was hour 2, I'd be like, what the fuck? But no.
Okay. Yeah, okay. It is a warrant. A warrant is a search. A search is a constitutional event under our Constitution. We require a showing, a real showing of proof to obtain a warrant, whether a FISA warrant or a regular criminal warrant. We don't know the metes and bounds of FISA warrants because one could say for good reasons or bad reasons, they have not been tested nearly as much as criminal warrants. In the courts, right? To understand, like, are they even constitutionally required when you're talking about foreign surveillance in domestic areas, right? Because a FISA warrant is for domestic surveillance related to foreign espionage, okay? All that said, I'm not trying to undermine that this is a warrant that requires a showing of proof, and that with the FISA warrants, these are warrants that are supposed to be very, very sensitive. They are signed off by, I believe, the deputy AG, and I believe at a certain point, even the director of the FBI themselves has to sign first. Yeah. So they go through multiple stages of review. They get passed on to Article 3 judges who sit on the fiscal court and their clerks who also run through them. So this is supposed to be a high threshold. Not gonna lie. Not going to lie to you on that point. That said, the standard for a warrant is probable cause. Okay? It is not the case that in criminal circles, probable cause does not mean 60% certainty. 70% certainty, 80%. It's closer to like 25 to 30% certainty. Okay, that doesn't mean that you don't take seriously investigating a political candidate, but warrants are made to get information as well. They are investigatory tools. It's a stage in the investigatory proceeding where you take additional efforts to come to an understanding of what the fuck is going on. And I understand your concerns with political bias and all that thing. I do understand it. But at the same time, the standard for getting a FISA warrant should not be too high. It should not be the showing of beyond a reasonable doubt that we demand in criminal trials. A FISA warrant is the ability of our government to, in some sense, to defend ourselves. And so, while I understand that not only were mistakes made, there was some criminal activity in the procedures to get this warrant. But do I think that just because you have an unverified warrant, it means that there's a corrupt process for getting a warrant? Sorry, unverified dossier that was used in the process of getting a warrant. I do not. That is not enough information for me to know that this was a corrupt motive to scuttle the Trump presidency if it ever emerged as a backup plan for, in case he got the election. No.
Okay. All right. Let's start with this. This gets to the meat of the issue, so I'm glad that we got here. This, to me, more than anything, proves what a partisan hack you I'm sorry. Like, when we get to the gravity of what you're saying here, I think it'll be evident to people that are trying to look at this objectively. Let's just go through a couple of rapid fire questions. You already say that the threshold for a FISA warrant should be high. You admit that. Should the threshold for a FISA warrant be higher, equal, or lower than sort of the traditional local police warrant to search your car or something of that nature?
As a constitutional matter, I think it should be probable cause. But procedurally, I know that it's much more difficult. And it is more difficult to get the warrant because of the procedures, not necessarily because of this. Of the substance standard.
I understand what you're saying. Do you think that do you think that the FBI understood that both the midterm exam and Crossfire Hurricane were both incredibly contentious investigations that could have actual political ramifications on who won an election? Thereby, they knew that they had to have
absolutely. They had internal discussions about it.
So they wanted to do everything as unpartisan as possible, as on the book as possible. You would agree with that?
That's what they said.
Right. And do you think that the threshold for spying on a campaign for president or spying on a president's team, do you think that threshold should be higher than, say, getting a FISA warrant against me or you?
As a matter of prudence, yes. As a substantive standard, no.
But that doesn't matter because we're not the substantive standard. Let me try to translate for the people listening. It's like, well, the way that the law is written and the legal nature of it, of course not. It should be equally applied to everyone. But in the way that it plays out, because these stakes are so high and the ramifications are so high, of course, the way this would actually play out.
Let me tell you how that would manifest itself, Rob. Let me tell you what I mean by prudent as opposed to substantive standard. I mean, you got to make sure, right, that you're not leaking shit. Really important, right? I think you would agree with that, especially in the nature of of election year, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I mean to say, by all accounts, you should not be fucking doctoring emails from the CIA. You should not be fucking sending texts to each other talking about whatever Lisa Page and Strzok were talking about with insurance thing, insurance policy, whatever you want to say.
But what's this have to do with what? Right, I get you. Okay, right, you're saying those were all bad things they did, but okay, I get it. I agree. That's more evidence for me.
You're talking about the underlying.
Right. So these are all right. Warrant. You're making my case because you're saying and there was all this other bad shit they did that was against the prudent nature of what they should be doing. Great, agree.
No, but you want to talk about the underlying evidence for the warrant, correct?
Correct.
Yes. Okay. So they had in their hands, right, a slew of connections between Carter Page and Russia. You downplay them, right? You say, because he worked at the university once. That was not it, right? That's not the extent of their Russian connections. I had a list of them before that the Pisco sent me.
Do you think that Hillary's team had equal or more substantial connections to Russians that could easily be verified through public sources?
Talking about the Podesta group?
Well, not just the Podesta group, people all through our campaign and Hillary, except for God's sakes, Hillary's husband met with Vladimir Putin himself, and then 2 weeks later was paid $500,000 by a Russian-owned bank to give a speech. Does that mean we should investigate her?
Is that about Bill Clinton?
Yes, that's her husband, I believe.
So I agree with you that standing by itself, right, those connections, I would not be comfortable for that, the connections themselves, to be the basis, the sole basis for a warrant. Okay? Agreed. A brick is not a wall, right? Context matters. And in this let me give you the you're going crazy. Let me give you the context of, you're an FBI officer and you tell me what you're doing, right? Uh-huh. You just received information from the intelligence services which, by the way, right now I don't know if you dispute anymore. That
this is being drawn out. Try to get to it, because I have a lot of thoughts.
The DNC was hacked by Russian agents or by operatives of Russia. Right? I don't know if you deny this.
Irrelevant or no, it's irrelevant to the discussion, but show the proof. CrowdStrike says, but they didn't hand the server over. But sure, a DNC paid firm says
this is you. You're the FBI agent who's receiving this information. You have additional information that started the investigation in the first place from also from your intelligence service that tells you that someone seems to say that someone connected to the Trump campaign has dirt on Russia, dirt on Hillary. Okay, that's what started the investigation. You have those connections, and then to confirm, right, this initial suspicion towards Trump, that's what started it, right? All of a sudden, this operative, this MI6 agent who's working with Fusion GPS, who's backed by a subsource that they've used before, as far as I know, or at least the MI6 agent claims that they've used this subsource before and they haven't filled them. They received this information, right? I analogize that to, like, what would it take to get a warrant to investigate someone for murder, right? Suppose that you had all those pieces, change them a little bit in the context of a murder, right? And you want to get a warrant and some agent that you've used before tells you, who has a good a track record with you, who you've used before, tells you, I got this report that it's in that foreign policy advisor's house over there, and it confirms, like, some whispers that we had. You should really search that house. You think there's not probable cause to search that house? You're crazy. There is.
No, it's not. It's not. So, okay, now let's go. Now, I've been very generous. I think that all through the night this has been happening. There's sort of these red herrings and sophistry that's put out to deflect from the actual important meat of the case here. So let's talk about this. We already got to why it's a high threshold, imprudent nature for why you would do this to get a FISA warrant, for why you would do it if you're going after a president of the United States and his campaign and team. That threshold, I'm not going to ask you again because we'll just get off in the weeds, but I think anyone of good faith would say that precedent, or that prudence, would have to be even higher, and the standard would be even higher if you knew that evidence was coming from someone who was paid by the opposition. So in other words, if I received evidence of some sort of salacious argument alleging some sort of crime against the opponent of a political operative who paid for it, I would say, I'm going to treat this evidence suspect because I know that these people have an incentive to smear this person. And so I'm going to treat it with suspect. So that, given the high natures of who's being investigated, the nature of what it is, a FISA warrant accusing someone of being a spy, that it's a presidential campaign and later presidential presidency, the team of the presidency, given that it was evidence that you're using that was paid for. Yes, I think that the very baseline is saying, hey, we should try to look in to see if any of this shit's true. Now, you say, well, it's going to be buttressed by the fact that, like, other shit was going on. None of that matters. That's not the way our system works. Just because there's connections that aren't illegal to places doesn't mean that you should be accused of being a spy. Please let me finish. Okay. You can clarify if you want to later. Yeah. Right? Like, so just because, like, Carter Page talked to Russians here or there, or he was accused of something of this in the past, doesn't mean you could accuse him of being a Russian spy now and violating his Bill of Rights protections because you're accusing him of being a Russian spy. Just because there was some other bullshit claim about George Papadopoulos that they also happen to be looking at doesn't mean that you could accuse Carter Page of being a Russian spy and getting a FISA warrant, thereby violating his rights. And the irony is they actually did go to this dude they trust, Christopher Steele, and said, hey, dude, we trust you. Here's $1 million if you could prove any of this. And he was fucking unable to do so. So the bare minimum should be, they should have done the most bare minimum of groundwork, knowing that it was like, I mean, because if you think of the implications, every one of us listening knows, Pisco. Everybody knows, with beyond a fucking shadow of a doubt. You know it, I know it, all of your supporters know it, all of the people listening to me know it. Every single person that will ever watch this throughout the end of time knows this. If Donald J. Trump would have, when he was president, paid for fucking opposition research of Joe Biden that was unverified, that was just shit that he paid for, and handed it off to the FBI, and the FBI would have been like, fucking A, let's spy on the Biden campaign, you would have went fucking nuts. Every one of us knows it. They didn't even fucking attempt to verify. They didn't even attempt. Like, it would be different if it's like, well, we tried to verify and it looked like there was smoke, but we were unable to prove shit. They didn't even fucking attempt to verify it. They didn't. They just said, hey, Christopher Steele, if you could prove this, we'll give you $1 million. And he said, let me get back to you. And they're twiddling their thumbs like, well, fuck it. We don't have time for all that. Let's just use the shit.
Wait, I mean, you already think the first application itself is the first application itself for you is enough. I mean, I don't know why we need to go into the renewals and the attempts out later afterwards. Why not just stick for the first application?
Let's do it. The first, you're right. The first application enough is proof. Everything else is icing on top. So, for example, when the IG says that he was appalled to find out that they actually went to Igor Dushenko, the subsource, and Igor said, well, this is innuendo and I'm being misrepresented and a lot of it was jokes and I can't believe that you're using this for a FISA warrant. And the FBI took that information, went to the FISA court and said, we talked to Igor Dushenko finally and we believe he's telling the truth. And the FISA court said, cool. And they didn't say, oh, and by the way, what he's telling the truth about is that this whole document's bullshit. They left that part out. So that's more evidence to suggest, as if you needed more, to show once more they were engaging in improper behavior. And the only plausible explanation is that they were doing so because they wanted to target Donald Trump. That's it.
Okay, but right. So to buy your story, right, you have to believe that, I mean, everyone is in on it, right? Who everyone is in on it. And they're all corrupt.
Like the 6-7 people that were running the investigation?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that is required. Okay. And they're all in on it as an insurance policy because most of them think Hillary's going to win, as does most of the country. So it's an insurance policy in advance to scuttle his campaign.
Well, not just in advance.
Oh, sorry.
Right?
To scuttle
because
his
president.
It was
renewed once he was president.
Not his campaign, to scuttle his president. Because this doesn't come out until his presidency, correct? Or at least leading up to his presidency after he won.
Mother Jones released information of this in October. They had already issued the FISA warrant in October. So, yes, there were leaks. Harry Reid also talked about this investigation ongoing. So, yes, there were leaks right before the election.
It did not become... It was not in the nature of, deliberate investigatory acts that were open and notorious for the country to see. At the very least, I'll say, right, if this is a scheme, it's an intentional one, right? It's one with purpose. It's one with malice. Yes. That's what it means to be corrupt. It's not corrupt.
Dispute. That's my argument. Correct.
Okay. So in order for it to be intentional, the purpose has to be as an insurance policy. That's the only way it makes sense, right?
It depends on what you mean by insurance policy. I would phrase it this way. The intent was to sabotage Trump's presidency and to get a national narrative to be able to smear him, to stymie him, and also at the same time be able to legally investigate him and go through his books, his communications, etc. in hopes of finding a crime. Show me the man and I'll find you the crime.
Except just because, as you know, warrants are particularized. They're supposed to be particularized. Mm-hmm. A FISA warrant on Carter Page would not give DOJ the right to tap the domicile of Trump.
Well, we know it was tapped, and we know that it was tapped, right? But DNS server data was tapped in Mar-a-Lago, was tapped in Trump
that's
Tower.
different. That's not.
Well, it's
I'm
different.
I'm talking about wiretaps. I'm talking about taps that get data as opposed like actual the substance.
Show me that. Show me that that's the case. Show me, because my understanding of this is through the 2-hop rule that they were able to sort of hoover up all of the communications between Carter Page and people he talked to, and then all of the communications between who those people talk to. So if you talk to me, they would get me and your communication, and then if I talk to Aftershock, they could also get me and Aftershock's communication, which means they would have effectively been able to get all of Trump's communications, at least at the time when these alleged crimes were occurring with Carter Page, right? They would have been able to get all, and it's not just, let me be clear here, right? Like, we consider the premier political scandal in this country Watergate. Well, what was the issue with Watergate? Well, a couple of bumbling fools went through their opponent's hotel and tried to get information about their campaign that could be used by Nixon, right? And we consider that a very big deal. Meanwhile, we have an so it's now, instead of a couple bumbling fools, how about the entire force of the FBI? And maybe they find information that, well, they don't act on in a criminal nature, but it's still embarrassing for Donald Trump. And so they could leak it to the press and to the Democrats to use as weapon. Oh, by the way, they were leaking like a sieve the whole time.
Yeah. So, let's take that in chunks again. So, number one, I think the comparison to Watergate is to the credit of the DOJ in this case. This, at the very least, there was the veneer of procedure here.
No, there wasn't. They didn't even attempt to verify the warrant. They accused someone of being a Russian spy, spied on a president, got information from the primary subsource that was all bullshit, continued to spy on the president using that. There is no veneer.
No. In terms of the procedure used before the search was executed.
Right, there's no veneer.
Which procedure was better? Watergate procedure or Crossfire Hurricane procedure?
Well, it's an interesting question because procedure implies that there's legal authority. Like, for example, if we look at shootings, the reason that we don't hold the same standard of a cop shooting someone as an individual shooting something is there are special protections and understandings of the job of a law enforcement
justified use of force.
Right. So when we're talking procedure, sure, two people that aren't the FBI or law enforcement breaking into someone's house, procedurally, there is no procedure, so that's against the law. Whereas a corrupt cop, kicking in your door in a search warrant, without a search warrant, you might say, well, procedurally, that's better than just some stranger breaking in. I guess, but procedurally, when it comes to the corruption of the institutions doing it, it's hardly, you're comparing to something that, in that sense, it's not the procedure that matters. It's the impact and the abuse that matters. So is it worse that a couple bumbling fools did something or the full force of the leadership of the FBI? I would say it's not even close.
The safeguards are the reason why we know about the improprieties in the first place, right?
They fought tooth and nail. They fought tooth and nail, right? Everything they were redacting. They said, we don't want to cooperate. It was only when an IG years later, and the damage was already done, right? It already stymied. We already had a special counsel. It went on for 3.5 years, right? And then it was, and this is something that we see constantly with the Democratic Party, where it's like they drag out the clock. And now you even said this at one point, you're like, oh, well, they fired people. What do you want now? Exactly. That's the point, right? When people like me were speaking up about this at the time in 2017, people like you were saying it was nonsense. Things were being done by the book. Now even James Comey comes out and goes, had I known now what I knew, or had I known then what I know now, I wouldn't have signed off on that warrant. And yet still you're saying, nope, I find what they did to be totally acceptable.
No. You're making the case that it's corruption. Mm-hmm. And my job is to put holes in your case.
Pisco, let's just make this clear as possible. So just so we're clear, if in 2024 a Republican wins, you are perfectly fine with them paying for opposition research and then having their attorney general have the FBI use it to spy on their opponents without even attempting to verify it. You're cool with that?
I don't think that I'm not okay with what happened in Crossfire Hurricane.
No. I just want to be clear. You would say, "Oh, that's not corrupt." Yeah, that's reasonable. I could see how that mistake would be made.
If they used unverified opposition research to get a FISA warrant on a Democrat, mm-hmm. would I see that as evidence? By itself, is it evidence of corruption? No, not given the circumstances. Wait.
Come on. First off, it's not by itself. As I've talked about, we can already see how, and again, what you'll do, and I talked about this, like it was one of my criticisms of the IG report. The IG report was just asking over and over, could this have been within the legal standards of the FBI? And it looks at each individual decision, right? So giving this person immunity, yeah, technically the FBI is within their bounds to do it. Going after this person, yeah, and so you look at that. But when you look at the picture of the whole, it starts to paint a picture that's devastating. So it's not just on its own. You already know that there was bias, that there was, the people that were running this had one preference. We know that it wasn't just they didn't verify the information. Then it was, they found out the information was bullshit from the primary source.
You're not counting the mitigating circumstances. I mean,
give me the mitigating circumstances. Okay. All right, they didn't verify it and used it, and then they tried to verify and found out it was bullshit, but still used it. Go ahead.
Happy to. Okay. Number one is the lack of clear motive in terms of like what the possible logical rationale would be, because you're saying the only way this makes sense is if it's as an insurance strategy to scuttle Trump's presidency.
Again, right? I don't know what you're talking about. Like you're using the term insurance strategy in a very strange way here.
Wait. Will you answer that? That this operation is a lot of hubbubaloo about nothing if it's not to fuck over Trump presidency.
Right. That's what it is. And it's not a hubbubaloo about nothing if it's not to fuck over Trump's presidency. They could have did it because they were trying to sleep with Melania and thought that it would be important to do this. The motivation for it's irrelevant if it was done in a corrupt manner. But yes, I'm not disputing the fact that I'm saying that it was done to fuck with Trump's presidency. Yeah.
Okay. So that means, right, that you think that Comey sat down with everyone on that Crossfire Hurricane team, including the lawyers who doctored the fucking whatever, right? Or at least they had the marching orders from their superiors. And they had a formal conspiracy and got together and at least nodded to each other, and there was a mutual assent that the prospect of a Trump presidency was such a risk that we needed to engage in this open conspiracy against the United States and its people.
I don't think that it was expressly said like, let's engage in a conspiracy and a coup to take.
I'm not saying you said, but there was that was the understanding,
right?
I mean,
like just like
there was a meeting of the minds.
Right? And we also know that we could see even before that we saw Obama and Biden and Susan Rice and others that were in the White House when they suggested using the Logan Act against Flynn, when they suggested making this information of Obama loosen the rules to share information amongst intelligence agencies. Yes, this is how it works. It has to do with the arrogance and the corruption of the Democrats, particularly under Obama moving forward. It's the same thing with the IRS. Do I believe that Lois Lerner sat down with the agents of the IRS and said, now we will target conservatives? No, but there's an implicit understanding that they are morally virtuous and that they're protecting this country. And so anything they do is justified because they're stopping evil people. That's exactly what happened here at the FBI. It was clear that they're biased. It was clear that they thought, you could read the pages of Strachan page, that Hillary should win 1,000,000 to 1, that they needed an insurance policy against Trump, and their actions spoke loudly to it. And saying that that's somehow beyond the pale, that's less like, because what you'll have the audience believe is this, that, well, it's so beyond the pale that 5 or 6 people at the top of the FBI could do that to say, you know what, we're going to put our thumb on the scale. That's so not possible that it outweighs a tremendous coincidence of all the things we see, including using information that you knew was not, that was paid for by the opposition and not verified to spy on a president. And then once attempting to verify it and finding out it was bullshit, continue. Can you explain to me, now I'm leaving you drive the questioning here. So let me ask you a question. Can you give me the plausible explanation how you would, one, not verify the document, and second, once you verified it, have the subsource tell you it was bullshit and still use that document? I would like you to answer that question.
Bro, so every level you can verify, like a verification to me, right, could mean getting a corroborating witness. It could mean going to the thing and seeing it yourself, right? They
didn't attempt to verify.
One method of verification, right, in terms of evidence of someone, is someone signing their name to something and saying this is true, right? And the credibility. You're
because
laughing.
That's nonsense, right?
What do you mean? Again,
you would. Okay, well, Roger Stone signs his name to this and says, this is true. Joe Biden's molesting small children in China. Roger Stone signed his name to it. That's verification.
Sorry.
He signed his fucking name. He signed his name to it.
You can't find me on this. We use affidavits and statements by officers and by confidential informants all the time as the basis for information for getting warrants. What do you think? All these, the warrant applications.
You're conflating. It's ad reduction absurdum again. You're conflating, right? Because you're saying, isn't it true that sometimes we take on good faith confidential informants and we listen
As a
to them,
matter of
and
course.
but then you ask yourself, in a threshold this high, we're spying on the president when you know that person is being paid by the opponent, when you know that they aren't able to verify it for you, and you don't even attempt to verify. No, it's all bullshit. You know it's bullshit.
Me.
No, I don't misunderstand you. What you're saying is like, well, they trusted Christopher Steele. They'd used him in the past, so they had no reason. To them, that is a form of verification. That a trusted person said to them, aha, Carter Page is a Russian spy. And so they said, well, instead of looking into the person that he talked to, we'll take the word at complete faith. Even though this could tip the balance of power in a presidential election, even though it could derail a presidential administration, even though we know that this was information paid for by Hillary Clinton, even though we know it was sourced by a Russian national, we still think it's good enough that Christopher Steele verifies for it. Even though we know that he's a liar and that he went out and we told him specifically not to talk to the press, but in October he was doing it and we knew. And so we know he lied about that.
That's after the first one. I mean, I don't know why you're doing
I don't know if that's true because he talked to Mother Jones, I believe, it's sometime in October. So it was right around the time of the first. I don't know the specific nature. But fine, let's take that part out of it. It's just abject bullshit. Everybody here knows if the shoe was on the other foot, you would say, how fucking corrupt is this? And we can prove it because when it comes to things such as your belief that Trump should have been impeached over the first impeachment of the Ukraine thing, you claim to know Trump's intent. You say, well, I look at this and even though he didn't say the specific words, this is a quid pro quo. You will not get this money unless you do this. Even though he didn't say that, I know that what he was implying was that, and it was purely for personal motivation. It couldn't have been that he was interested in investigating a potential crime that had to do with $1 billion of USA. It couldn't have been. I know that he's guilty. And that's how I fucking know that if Trump paid for opposition research and his DOJ and people that were sympathetic to him and the FBI said, let's fucking use this to spy on his opponent. And by the way, we're not going to attempt to verify it. You would go fucking apeshit. I know you would. Well, everyone here knows it.
Okay, but if you're going to, first of all, I have answers for the impeachment and the comparison to the impeachment. You don't like the answers, frankly, and we've gone back and forth on it a million times. I'll repeat them again, but just, if you're going to hold me to answer for a double standard, why don't you hold yourself to that same double standard, the one that was just given? You don't think that Trump was doing it for a personal motive to help himself politically?
No.
But you definitely believe that there was this conspiracy among the FBI, but you don't believe that Trump acting by himself unilaterally, without just where he wouldn't need to have any formal conspiracy. You don't believe that he was motivated to help his own campaign and his own political thing? You think he was genuinely motivated by something to the interest of the country?
I think the two things could be true simultaneously. I don't think that there's proof that he offered a quid pro quo, and I do think that it's entirely plausible that he thought that there was an actual crime committed by the Biden administration. He had witnessed a corrupt FBI that was willing... Please let me finish. He had witnessed a corrupt FBI that was willing to spy on him based on obvious bullshit and lied to his face over and over again in the form of James Comey, then repeatedly leaked to the media to harm him. And he had reason to suspect, as I do, that the FBI and the Department of Justice and the State Department covered up for the crimes of Hunter Biden and covered up for the quid pro quo of Joe Biden because they had a vested interest in protecting that sort of Obama administration and people like Biden. And so he thought that because he couldn't trust the FBI and he had people in the DOJ that he did trust like Barr, that he was have an investigation into the quid pro quo to get Hunter Biden off the hook, that he would ask Zelensky, hey, could you cooperate with this because there's something incredibly fishy with it? Yeah, I think that that's entirely plausible and correct. I think he was right to be distrusting of the FBI because it is evident that the FBI would bury this story just like they buried the Hunter Biden laptop, just like they buried the Anthony Weiner laptop, just like they allowed the destruction of subpoenaed evidence under the Hillary Clinton midterm investigation, just like they left the Podesta group off the hook for FARA violations. So yeah, he had every reason to be distrusting the FBI, and I think that that's what he was doing. He wasn't asking someone to make up its shit to help him politically. He was saying, it's fucking insane the amount of crimes that my opponents have committed, and the institution that's designed for investigating those crimes is fucking corrupt to the core and refuses to do their job. And so given that the stakes were $1 billion tax dollars that not in an alleged but in a proven and admitted quid pro quo were used to fire a prosecutor that was looking into the vice president's son, because I can't trust my own investigative agencies, it might be interesting to see that the country that occurred in Ukraine, if their investigative agencies have anything to say about it. Yeah, I think that's an entirely reasonable position.
For the purpose of helping the country, not my own political ambitions, right?
Could be both.
Yeah, I mean, that's your plausibility read on the Trump thing, and
Yep.
in that plausible read, Trump's actually doing the right thing.
Could be.
He's, I mean, like he's actually doing the right thing,
Sure.
right? So, like, let me tell you what I think really happened with the Trump investigation. This is what I think. I don't buy that there was this menacing backup plan by the deep state to fuck. I just want to finish this as you finish here, to fuck over Trump. I think that they thought that Carter Page was a Russian asset. I think they really thought that, and they were. And this is the kind of the look, and I guess this is why you think that fucking Durham is a stooge, because that's kind of the angle that I think a lot of conservatives that thought that Durham was playing, is that the FBI got duped and the FBI are like saps. I think the FBI has confirmation bias, and it's happened 1,000 times in the past with the FBI. What are you so befuddled about?
Bias?
Well, no, confirmation bias.
What's that
Not
mean? Define
political
that.
bias. Confirmation bias, as in they're confirming their priors.
Right.
They have an initial theory, and everything fits. You know, they see nails everywhere.
That's
they're
another
hammers.
form of bias. Right. So they thought, yeah, we think Carter Page did this. So
Okay,
come
that's not
hell
the
and high
bias
water,
you're
we're going to
talking
investigate.
about.
But it's another
That's
form
not-
of bias. And when you take that into
And
account, that
also,
there was
doesn't-
also bias, why would they have that confirmation bias? Why would you make that confirmation in the first place? Well, probably because there's like, would you be more likely to reach a confirmation bias about someone you didn't like or someone you did like?
I mean, you speak to me, yeah, like in general. The bias of the people who, the political bias, I'm sure would be relevant to our assessment about whether or not they're more or less likely to be, a confirmation bias. You'd hope that they'd leave that stuff at home, but I'm not here to say that, in general. I'm not a fucking psychologist. I don't know if there's been fucking studies done on double-blind studies on confirmation bias. My intuition is you're more likely to have a confirmation bias against people you don't like in the first place.
I would say that's fair.
Okay.
Yeah.
But just to answer the question, but can I finish my take?
Sure.
Generally? Okay. So I think they thought that this Carter Page guy is a fucking Russian asset. I'm don't think that at that time they had any reason to think that Trump was a Russian asset. I don't think that they had a reason to. They did not get a warrant on Trump himself. I think that they thought that this was the guy that was the basis of the Papadopoulos thing. They saw that there was a DNC hack, and that's what they thought. And that's what they thought. Like that to me seems way more plausible than what I think is fairly risky and convoluted insurance policy that would have been found out, and according to you, was found out fairly easily.
Again, right, we're not just taking it into the vacuum. I'd just like you to answer one thing. I've asked the question more times. Can you explain to me under any scenario which they didn't verify and they used it and whoopsie daisy, it was confirmation bias, but when they talked to the subsource and the subsource basically said it's all bullshit that they continue to use?
I mean, you're paraphrasing in an unacceptable way.
How would you
You're
phrase it?
paraphrasing
Okay, let me try to almost verbatim. When the primary subsource that made the allegations of the criminal nature of Carter Page possibly being a Russian spy said that many of the comments he made that were sourced in that document were made in jest over beers, and that he thought that Christopher Steele had misrepresented fundamentally many of the things he said.
Yeah, I believe those comments were tailored to the peace stuff.
Not just the peace stuff. That's what he said about some of the salacious allegations were over beers, but he said in general that he thought that his points were misrepresented and that it was innuendo and he didn't have proof of these allegations.
With respect to, first of all, I believe Christopher Steele, to this day, as far as I am aware, still stands by the majority of his document.
Yeah, Igor Dashchenko disagrees. He was the subsource.
No. He disagrees with respect to, I believe, some of the specific claims, but I'm not aware that like the claims related to Carter Page, which are the basis of the FISA warrant, yes or no, the salacious stuff, that is not the basis of the FISA warrant. Correct?
The peace stuff, perhaps not. Interesting that it got leaked to the press then. But yes, you're right. The peace stuff isn't the basis of the warrant on Carter Page. It's the other claims that were made by Igor Dashchenko. If you're correct in your assessment that Igor Dashchenko basically said, yeah, this shit's all real, except this peace shit. That's wrong. Why would the Inspector General be so disingenuous to say that he found that to be the most shocking thing? That basically the primary subsource said, look, this information, I was shocked that it was used for a warrant because I felt that I was being misrepresented and was unable to prove it. Why, in your opinion, did Horowitz mislead people in his report into saying that that was something shocking, that the primary subsource said that he was shocked that this was used because a lot of it was innuendo and unprovable?
Why is your question is, why, under my theory of of facts. Horowitz misleads people by saying he was shocked that
Correct.
Dushenko was shocked.
Correct.
Right?
No.
I think I need the quote.
Horowitz was shocked. Horowitz was shocked and thought it was incredible that they talked to the primary subsource, and the primary subsource basically said, "I feel like I'm being misrepresented. I find it strange that you're using this for a warrant." And then
I think
Horowitz found that troubling.
If you give me the quote, or if
I
you
don't have it in front of me.
Again,
it's just amazing the hoops you'll jump through. I mean, look, the shit is at this point up above the head. Like you're like 50 feet deep in the shit. It's just everybody can see it. I don't know what to say. Like, and I do enjoy this exercise because it helps me buttress my argument. It helps me, but it's just like the appropriate response is literally just to laugh at you and to call you act because that's just the truth. There is nothing that could be done. Like literally tomorrow. Andrew Weissman could come out and be like, we made the whole fucking thing up with Hillary Clinton. And you would be sitting here being like, well, when they said made it up, possibly it has to do with confirmation bias. And sometimes we accept that the FBI will get the primary subsource and not want to verify. Like, that's who you are. It is. It's absolute. It is evident. It is evident.
Listen, the hoops that you really call me a sap. Call me a sap, but like,
it's
I truly think that like most of the people in the FBI and our intelligence agencies are trying to protect our country.
Irrelevant. It's not the case. I don't agree with that. It's irrelevant on this particular case. They could have like, for example, right? They could come to their mind and say, look, we think that Donald Trump's a fucking bad dude. We think he's a lunatic. We think that he's running for office for clout and to enrich himself, and we fucking hate him, and we don't care that he got elected or not. We know what's best for this country, and it's not Donald Trump. He's a disaster, and we truly care about the people of the United States, and we have to protect them from this lunatic Donald Trump. And so, one of the ways we could do so is to investigate, because we know that motherfucker committed crimes. We know the people around him committed crimes. So if we just had a reason to look into, oh, look at this opposition research that we're not even going to attempt to verify. Let's start fucking digging, boys. And you would say, well, they really cared about the United States people, and they knew that Donald Trump was a shithead. And by the way, that's something that you're going to agree with. You'd be like, that's right, Donald Trump is a shithead. Orange man bad, so I'm okay with using unverified opposition research.
The whole futility. The whole futility argument is it's a FISA warrant against Carter Page, and that does not get you the information that now it could, right? You don't necessarily know what information you're going to get, but it's a lot to risk for a totally unsure bet to get to Trump, to get some salacious material on Trump.
What are you talking about? What are you talking about? What's the risk? People like you will suck them off no matter what. What risk? You think that CNN or the New York Times or that the other people in the FBI and the oversight? You think the Department of Justice? You think the CIA? Who's this risk to? Explain to me the risk.
These people communicated, Rob.
Sure.
And under your theory of the facts, these people communicated. These people had conversations, or at least it wasn't an unspoken agreement. It was they were
Well, that's not true. That again, like. I mean, again, for someone who's a lawyer and that's at least more aware of investigations and criminal, criminal enterprises and RICO and shit, like, come on, dude. Are you trying to tell me that, like, well, the way this had to go down was they had to be, like, in writing with a fucking notary stamp being like, we are fucking Donald Trump over. Of course not. It's absurd. It's an absurd claim.
I'm not saying that it was a formalized to the sense that it's memorialized in a piece of writing or something like that. What I'm telling you is that
real quick, while I'm thinking about it, I've been very generous in leaving you to
control
the direction. But let me say this: like, given that that's your standard, so I just want to clear your worldview up here. The FBI, no matter how shady it looks, it's a big risk for them to do this because they could be found out, because theoretically someone could find the communication. So they wouldn't do that because it's a big risk. But Trump did that shit. He did he did a quid pro quo on a call where he knew a bunch of people he did that shit. He did that, right?
No. Well, Donald Trump, in making that request of Zelensky, was not doing something that's like, quote unquote, outside of the explicit authority of the presidency, right? The president has the power to conduct the foreign policy of the United States. And so Trump's, there was no criminal act in Trump pressuring the Zelensky regime to
Nonetheless, he knew
what do
the
you want to say?
political
What do you want to say?
ramifications
You don't
of it.
want
Like he knew the
you don't have
political.
patience to hear me talk.
It's an irrelevant point anyway. I'm just saying, like, this shit doesn't apply the other way, right? You would never say with Trump or people connected Trump, like, well, there's no way they would ever engage in any unethical criminal behavior because they know that there's a chance that they could be caught. So they would never, you would never say that. You would say that's an absurd fucking deflection. But yet that's the standard you'll give for the FBI. They wouldn't engage in any corrupt action because they know if they did, they could be caught. Therefore, that proves that they wouldn't do it. So ignore all the evidence.
No. What I'm saying is, if you're willing to do all this shit, right? If you're willing to do all this, why not do something more effectual?
I don't know. Tell me why Kevin Kleinsmith changed an email from the CIA to say the opposite of the truth. Tell me. Why didn't he do more if he did that?
Precisely. That goes to me show that it is about convenience. It is about confirmation bias. That's what it tells you.
That disproves your entire point. That literally dispoints your entire point that you just made. Your point is, here's this level of corruption you're talking about that's here. But they wouldn't have done that because to do that and risk that, if you're going to do that, you might as well do what's up here, right? And then you're saying, but Kevin Kleinsmith committed this level of corruption down here. But to claim he would have done this is absurd. He would only do this. So you wouldn't do this because if you did this, you would do this. But you would do this, and that doesn't mean that you would do this if you did this.
No.
It's fucking stupid. It's nonsensical.
The kind of acts that are in concert with the mental state that we're talking, the various mental states that we're alleging, right? If you're alleging the confirmation bias and convenience and laziness approach, then what Kleinsmith did makes total sense, and no further, right? That makes total sense. And he should be.
You have the opposite of it. You have you're looking at this the opposite way. Let me explain.
Let me finish. Okay.
The crime of Kevin Kleinsmith, if you were worried about getting caught, what Kleinsmith did is far more likely to get caught for far less bang for your buck than the allegation that someone used unverified material to spy on a presidential campaign. Because then there's all sorts of, what does verify mean? Right? Which is the arguments you're making. It could mean this, it could mean that. So you could do that and say, well, there would still be plausible deniability, so we feel we could get away with that. But you would never say, I think I could get away with changing an email from the CIA saying the opposite of what it actually says.
Wait, how do you explain that? How do you explain his conduct? Because that seems to be like...
That's right, because they weren't saying... Because the reality is their animus towards Trump was such that they were willing to take those risks to engage in criminal and corrupt behavior to take him down. That's why they were willing to do... If they're willing to do something for far less impact, that's far more blatant of a crime, how does that jive with your worldview of they wouldn't do something far more impactful that's far harder to prove as a crime?
So under this view, they're not... They're brazen. They're arrogant.
True.
Yeah, I mean, you have to believe. Yeah, okay.
Okay, yeah. They used unverified opposition research to spy on Trump, right? They allowed Hillary Clinton's team to delete subpoenaed evidence. They charged Manafort for failing to register as a foreign lobbyist, but allowed the Podesta group to go through, right? They charged Flynn with the Logan Act, something that's almost never been charged, right? Like, yes, they were absolutely fucking brave. They leaked like a fucking sieve. They investigated him under charge of they leaked like a sieve. The FBI leaked like a sieve to the fucking press in order to smear him. Yes, they were very brazen. That's what makes it all the more frustrating because it wasn't even particularly something that was being covered up that much. And yet, the press covered for them. The Democrats said it was okay, and people like you eat the shit up despite the brazen nature of it, which shows that you will take any amount of shit they shovel as long as it's being targeted at people that you don't like.
I just don't think I don't understand the rational actor that does all this, right, on the chance that Hillary loses the election and gets an ineffectual, unproductive FISA warrant. At least at the time, I guess I didn't know it would be unproductive. But at this level of corruption, you're doing warrantless searches, right? You're not fucking around with why even fuck around with FISA? Why not just fucking?
They were doing warrantless searches as well, but you want to check your ass in some.
I guess we wouldn't know. Don't know.
You are the case that proves why they would do something the way they did. Because people that have a predisposition to hating Trump are going to be willing to accept a certain standard. Maybe someone like you wouldn't accept if all of a sudden it just came out like, the FBI is like, we got this fucking transcript of Trump's emails and phone calls, and you'd be like, Hey, where'd you get that? And they're like, fuck it. We said fuck it. We don't even need a warrant. We're getting it. Maybe
At least
even
you don't think
someone
I'm
like you, would be like, oof, that's bad. But if they say,
Well,
we
no,
went through a
you do believe
FISA
I
court,
would, I would say wolf, right?
I don't. It's 30% chance you wouldn't. 30% chance you'd say, well, I'm not joking. I really believe that. Like, because the levels of the brazenness of the corruption of this is so. I mean, again, the first time I ever talked to you about this, I said, do you think that the FBI should attempt to verify evidence before they use it to get a FISA warrant? And you literally went on a 6-minute tirade where you didn't say yes
I went
or
on
no.
a tirade today.
And then,
I just went on a tirade
listen,
today.
let me finish. And then you were like, yeah, I guess they should. And then today, like a year and a half, 2 years after the fact, you literally did the same thing again.
No. Yeah. The reason why I go on a tirade in that point is because what you mean by verify matters, right?
Right. So you're proving my
if you mean verify beyond a reasonable doubt.
That's not what I mean.
No.
I mean an attempt to verify. I mean an attempt more than Like, I don't know how else to say that. Like, it's weird because it's politics. You can't even think of an analogy. It's one fucking team that has an incredible incentive to smear their opponent saying, here's some fucking evidence, now spy on this prick. And you're like, okay, I'll take it. I'm not going to look into it. Like, that's incredible. It's incredible. And the fact that you would try to defend this, again, you would never accept the shoe on the other foot. If Trump's team came out and said, listen, man, we fucking swear to you that this
Trump's
shit
team?
about Joe Biden.
This is Obama's team. I mean, like,
Right.
You believe that the barriers to the DOJ, they're non-existent, and but they were existent when Trump was in office. I mean, or in other words, I guess the DOJ is running the show, and the president only has an influence if they're playing along to get along.
It doesn't matter. I don't have to connect Barack Obama to anything. I could say that the people in the Department of Justice and the FBI engaged in this corrupt behavior against Trump, and most of them were there during the end of Obama's presidency and during Trump's presidency. The idea that all of a sudden, like, imagine this. Imagine that there's a particular FBI agent that's there under Barack Obama, and he says, I like Obama and I hate Trump, right? And so I'm willing to engage in some shitty action against Trump because I like Obama and I hate Trump. And then Trump wins and he goes, now I like Trump. Trump's my boss now. It's bullshit, right? And you can see this isn't just, the FBI isn't the only agency. You could see, for example, the Department of State, right? When they talked about things like our foreign policy, and it was clear that they didn't like Donald Trump. You can see it with the generals that admitted that they misled Trump about how many troops were in Syria. So when Trump ordered the troops to be removed, they misled him about that, so they were able to keep.
Oh, by the way, when I think that there was some shit like that on some like nuclear thing where they're like, oh, I had private talks with China, or some shit like that. I forget which general said that, but I don't know if it was ever verified or whatever. But on stuff like that, I find that, you can ask my Discord. I even say shit like that where, like, if you're misleading the commander in chief about like military shit, that's a huge fucking problem. And I didn't like it when it happened to Trump. I think it's terrible. I do not think that we should be run by oligarchs and shadowy oligarchs who control the show. Maybe I'm just.
Let me introduce you to the FBI, Pisco.
Yeah. I am not someone who wants to be run by the deep state. I'm not someone who. I think it's problematic, the whole like, oh, we're the opposition to Trump within the organization. I think if you have some moral compunctions about serving under Trump, you should have resigned.
Agreed. I agree with all that. I just applied to the FBI as well, and you don't.
Yeah. Okay. I just, as a factual matter, I think what explains their conduct in Crossfire Hurricane in the months before the election is I think is more easily explained by confirmation bias and what the fuck just happened with the DNC servers and them trying to fuck over some Russians.
What happened with the DNC servers? They listened to CrowdStrike, who was wrong the next time CrowdStrike blamed Russia for
Oh God!
And again, it's irrelevant to the point, right? Like, it's another red herring. It's very simple. It's very simple. In a regular run-of-the-mill police investigation of someone, if someone received information, I would expect them to attempt to check the underlying sources of the information.
I love that context, Rob. I think it's beautiful for you to say that, because that's what I just think that what we think warrants are and the importance we put, so the relative purpose of them, we see them as a little different. I see warrants as investigatory in nature. And if you had, listen to me, just let me get this out.
and I'll repeat it again. I want you to have an answer to this. If there were a similarly situated political figure, and some MI6 agent, said, here's this report. I have reason to believe, I'm attesting to it, that there's a dead body in Carter Page's house. We had reason to believe that he had murderous intent before. He said some sketch things about some person. This person's missing, and this is me, MI6 agent, and I'm telling you, there's a body in there. You got to go in there. Come on, that's enough for a search warrant in this country.
No, it's not. And let me explain why. Right?
In this country, it's enough.
No, it's not. It's not analogous to exactly what I'm. But let me explain what it was. First, you're factually incorrect. It wasn't an MI6 agent. Second, it was
whatever. Sorry, British.
Right. It was a former MI6 agent. Right. Yeah, secondly, would you admit that even our allies possibly have an influence that they would like to exert on who they would like to see
100%
president of the United States? So, do you think that foreign election interference is an important issue that we should strive to try?
No. Listen. I acknowledge. First of all, I think there's a difference between allied countries, and not to say that they shouldn't. Yeah,
I agree. There's an enemy country, it'd be more skeptical, but we acknowledge that even an allied country. For example, if I ran for president and I said America first, and you ran for president and said UK first, the government of the UK might be like, we'd rather see Pisco in office. Yeah, that's true. And so we would be skeptical. The whole point is we want our country and the people of our country deciding the president, not the thumb being put in the scale of foreign actors and not of our intelligence agencies.
Trudeau wants to see Biden in office.
Sure.
I think probably even Boris Johnson wants to see Biden in office. I'm not convinced that a lot of people who we say are our friends like Trump. Even the Liberal Party in Australia, which is like the Conservative Party, they did not like Trump at all. Like a lot of people didn't like Trump. Right?
That's making my point. Right. So why would we accept with no proof a foreigner who is a former spy who we know was paid for by the opposition saying there's a dead body in there, go check? And by the way, even that amount of a warrant is different, because what's tantamountly different to that is that's checking a specific location. You go there, see there's no dead body, and you say, okay, let's get the fuck out of here. That's different than saying we need a running 1 year, 4 times you go in, there's no body there, and you're like, well, we're going to search through these papers and emails and shit just to make sure. And by the way, we're going to do it for a year and renew this warrant 4 times. Bullshit. Like, you're not doing that. That it's fundamentally different.
Well, let's talk about this, and then hopefully,
we will have to wrap up soon. I do have to say, it's not that I don't enjoy the conversation.
I'm hoping I can get 2 or 3 minutes of your time to talk about Tuesday.
Yeah, I would like that too by the end of it. Yes.
So I'll close by saying this, and with respect to warrants, I agree with you that the FISA shits can be scary, because these warrants are essentially like you can tap their phones and see their communications, and ostensibly, possibly their entire homes. You can find out everything that's in their homes. You can search, they're pretty broad warrants on particularized the individual, of course. Like, you have to show that they own the thing, right? Or they reside in the place, I believe. So that's not to say, and it's not for a particular crime, right? It's for being an agent of the foreign power, or being an actor, a foreign spy, right? Those are the kinds of things it's used for. And so the endpoints, right? There's no end point necessarily implied in there, where it would be for traditional.
That's why your analogy's no good, saying the dead body. That's a fundamentally different thing.
This is me being honest with you and telling you and showing you ways in which that there are differences here that would raise levels of concern that wouldn't be apparent in the criminal context. And that's why I say that up front, that if it were a dead body, that's something that you can go in there, you can check in 30 minutes, and you'll find out. You'll find out tomorrow if there's a dead body in there, and if there isn't, they'll be held to pay. There'll be an investigation, all that shit. And it's a lot more murky in this area. We're like, well, what is a foreign spy? Like, what are we looking for? When does this end? Those are problematic things that aren't necessarily raised in the criminal context. I agree with that. I'm just saying, I'm not on all the way on your area, where I think you're putting too much of an evidentiary burden at the warrant stage, even in the FISA context.
No, I totally. Think of the standard, right? Think of the standard for potential abuse going forward. This effectively makes the party in political power you be able to use the most powerful investigative agency in the history of the world as their personal research endeavor, right? Because all they have to do is pay for any ally, anybody of any credence that's an ally. All they have to do is pay them a handsome sum of money and say, take this report to the FBI and say that you truly believe that my opponent is operating at behest of a hostile foreign power. And you would say, given solely on the nature of the credentials of that person that's handing them that document, even if it's known that he was paid for by the opposition, that you would say that's reason enough to investigate.
I think that I actually think it's less likely going forward. And the reason why I think it's
yeah, right. Yeah, of course.
No, I really do. I think that the DOJ was embarrassed by this the IG report. Wait, you don't agree?
No, well, yeah, they were embarrassed. There were no consequences. Right, I agree with all of that. But like, again, this is again proving sort of what I'm saying in my narrative. Right, if this happens and the shoe's on the other foot, the shit won't stand. Right. First off, the FBI isn't going to be pro-Trump or pro any actual populist. Fuck, they'd do it to a lefty candidate as well that was considered, a threat to the establishment orthodoxy. If a lefty would come into power, right, and they would be like, I find that these foreign regime wars are corrupt, and Chuck Schumer came out and said, well, we'll just say it was, a young Bernie. Does Bernie have a kid? Bernard Jr. Sanders, right? And he comes out and it's like, damn these, foreign wars, damn this.
I just want a little thing here. When I was like younger and I found out his name was Bernard, it fucked with my head. I'm not gonna lie.
God, I don't like Bernie, but like Bernard with the little mittens, like there is something comical.
Yeah, I know. Listen, and I know that I surprised you when I said that I voted for Bernie in 2016 and 2020. I did.
Yeah, I believe you though. But that does surprise me. But I'm just saying, like, so if he had a son that was running, Bernie probably not going to run. But if he had a son that was running, and like, he said things critical of sort of a military-industrial complex or the FBI to the point where Chuck Schumer came out and said, "Oh, this guy's got to be careful because these intel agencies are finding 6 ways from Sunday and getting back at him." And then his opponent used the intel agencies, paid for opposition research, and gave it to the intel agencies, and was like, "Oh yeah, that fucker's up to shenanigans. You better look into him." And they looked in. That's conceivable that could happen to a left-winger who is also critical of these same institutions, because to me, it's about them preserving their hegemony. Right now, in the status quo, and definitely in the status quo of 2016, the FBI had this power, and they agreed with the people that had potential oversight over them, like the Obama administration, and that's sort of the policies that they wanted. They didn't want someone coming in that was going to say, I don't like what you're doing here. I want reforms here. They didn't want that. And so they had an incentive, just like Chuck Schumer said, to be like, well, let's fucking go after this guy. Why would Chuck Schumer say that? Do you think that was hollow when Chuck Schumer said that they would find 6 ways of getting back at him?
Do I think it was hollow in the sense that like it was an empty thread that he was just bloviating, or hollow?
Right.
Like,
well, what I mean is, like, when we're talking about issues,
the alternative is he's just being so brazen that Schumer's in on it, or at least he's aware of the corruption.
I think it was opposite. I think that was a moment of Schumer actually with some regret in his voice. I think that was Schumer saying, like, even if we have problems with them, they're so fucking powerful. Like under Hoover, presidents were fearful of the FBI, right? Because they had this ability to turn your life upside down. And so the most powerful elected leader in the free world has to be fearful of criticizing executive branch employees that work under him, because and here's why it's unique that Schumer said it. Schumer has no love for Trump. It's not like, if you were to tell me, like, Rob, don't fuck with that guy, he'll whoop your ass. Like, you're saying that to me out of compassion. Like, I wouldn't do that, man. You can get your ass whooped, right? But if you're someone that hates me and you're like, like, I'm not saying this because I like Rob, but he's about to get his ass whooped, that's what we're talking about. Schumer doesn't like Trump.
Oh, you think he was actually like being regretful and like, oh fuck, they're gonna find a way to get it to you?
I don't think of it that way. I think that he was saying a truth that I know and many people know, and he was saying it out loud, which is, you can't fucking criticize them. And he's just like, he was making it like, I think he's regretful if it was up to Schumer, he'd say, I want the fucking power. I don't want to be beholden to these assholes. But he's saying, like, I know that I'm beholden, and I know that the president's beholden to some certain degree, and you got to be real fucking careful to criticize them. But the point he's making is, it's so obvious Trump's fucking up. Right? He's fucking up because the fact that he's publicly criticizing them, he's going to get it. They're going to fucking get him. And he's just saying, and that's exactly, it just so happens. It just so happens that's exactly what happened. And it's they got egg on their face. They're embarrassed. Bullshit. It wasn't just a whoopsie daisy. They knew exactly what they were fucking doing. And Schumer knows it. He knows.
I mean, that's a kind of deep statist view of our agencies, which I'm sure there's some. I mean, I know that there are entrenched individuals, to say nothing of tendencies and beliefs and attitudes and cultures in these agencies that persist between presidencies and that are independent of the political branches that they're supposed to be beholden to. I'm not going to deny that those things exist. I guess it's always going to be between you and me. It's always an argument of the extent, right? The extent of this, or how much is this happening, or to what degree. I think that Trump was able to bend a lot of these agencies to his will, and he wasn't able to make them break. He wasn't able to make them do everything they wanted, but real policy changed under Trump. I mean, Trump got a lot of what he wanted to get done, at least with respect to the agencies. He pulled out of things that you might consider the status quo, status kind of position.
Like what? Let's take the FBI specifically. How did he fundamentally reform policies?
FBI. I think the FBI was a little bit harder for him to.
Okay, how about the CIA?
Take hold of. I
mean, let's just go through the list. Okay,
I'm not privy to that.
All right, the CIA. How about the IRS?
I'm gonna say foreign intervention, right? So Afghanistan.
State Department.
Yeah. Let's talk about
kicking
that.
and screaming, right? They came out all against him and were like fucking rats.
But he did it, right? And Biden went through. I mean, how do you explain that decision? That the American people were just so against the continuation of the war that essentially they had to?
Huh?
Or wait, how do you explain the decision to withdraw from Afghanistan?
I don't understand what one has to do with another. I'm telling you that Trump made policies on foreign policy that it was clear that the State Department hated. He made policies that it was clear that the military leaders hated. They lied right to his face, as you've already admitted, which was terrible. So to the effect that, allegedly, they admitted it. They admitted that we misled about how many troops.
Let me amend that. As far as I know, I've heard about it. I have not verified it.
All right, that's fair.
I have not verified it, so I don't. So that's why I put it allegedly in there. So I'm sure you're more informed than that.
Okay, but the point is this, right? For example, I could come in, right? If I was elected president, I could come in and be like, okay, I'm going to disband the IRS. Theoretically, that could happen. You'd say, well, therefore, the idea that these executive agencies had a bias against Rob is just not possible because he affected change. Well, no, he affected change because he had the legal authority to do so, but the people that were the resultant of that change were embittered, and they sought to leak information. They were leaking phone calls to the press. They were leaking all this shit that was designed to harm Trump in the political sphere to the public. They were leaking, and at the same time, there were never-ending investigations, impeachments, etc. That was going on. It's happened. So the idea that he bent these organizations to his will is just complete fucking nonsense. He did not.
I unilaterally, in totality, no. Right, that he wasn't able to make the State Department in his image, but part of that reason is because Trump is just not a good manager. He just isn't. And
but again, that's irrelevant. You're making the position that he bent them to his will, and now you're like, well, of course he didn't really because he's not a good manager.
No. What I mean to say is they enacted Trumpian policies, and Trump was in charge, in my opinion. Just like I feel like Biden or his handlers are in charge, and the agencies are, they are influenced by who's in. I do not believe that we have lost our democracy by agency capture. I do believe that the presidents have significant influence, and if you don't believe that, then how is Biden fucking up so hard in your opinion? Right? You think he's fucking up? He's clearly doing something, right?
I'll tell you right now, I don't understand the relevance of this, but I'm just gonna we'll move on to the election here because we have to. So I don't see the relevance of this. I think that it's quite clear that there was corruption, that they engaged in incredible brazen bias, not even attempting to verify this, and using that to spy on a presidential campaign and later president. I think that it's in your face. It's so brazen. But I'll say something that maybe you'll agree or disagree with. I think that a lot of the generals in foreign policy, sort of the State Department type, I think they were fucking pissed at Biden. about the Afghanistan thing. That's what
Yeah, I think so too.
I think, and this is conspiratorial. You can call me a conspiracy theorist for this. I kind of think that they were like, okay, you want to pull out? We're going to make it a fucking shit show for you.
Oh, that's funny.
I think I would not be surprised that they're like, okay, if we're going to be forced to pull out, right? And Biden's not a strategy man at this point. It's like, we will do such in a way that the next time someone suggests we pull out, we could say, look what happened last time. That wasn't good, right? We told you we should have stayed. And when you said we should pull out, look what happened. You know, I think that's what happened. I think that there were people. No, you still have to put the blame with Biden because some of these decisions were so fucking nonsensical that he should have stepped in and been like, wait a minute, you're closing Bagram before we get the people out? Like, that's fucking crazy. But yeah, that's what I believe. I don't think that they intentionally bombed children when they said it was ISIS-K. I think that they saw a target and went for it, and it was fucking hastily done, and it tragically killed children. And then they covered their ass. But I do think that they intended for it to be a clusterfuck when they pulled out. Yeah, when I say I think, let me rephrase. I think it's a possibility.
Yeah,
I think it's also.
You think it's not impossible? You think it's plausible? It's plausible.
Yeah, I think it's something that could happen. I can't prove it. I wouldn't fucking bet my life savings on it. You know, that's $30 that I might need in the future. But that's what I'm saying. You know, like, but. You know, I will. It is one thing I'll give Biden credit for. I think it's fucking, no matter how you slice it, the way in which he enacted withdrawal was a fucking disgrace and one of the dumbest possible things that I think you could do. But I still stand by that Biden made the right decision withdrawing from Afghanistan. Yeah. The way in which he did it was terrible, but I do think that it took courage. I think that the establishment orthodoxy is, let's stay another 20 years. I think that's the truth. And I think that Biden, this is just pure conjecture on my point. I think Biden is a man that basically at this point isn't running the show. It's Ron Klain and people like that. And I think that, you know, sometimes he goes a little off the reservation for them. He starts talking off monitor. And I suspect that Biden was meandering about, well, this Afghanistan shit, that's something that, and they were just like, God damn it, Joe. Really? You're gonna go through with this, huh? You're gonna go through with it. And I don't care if it's because Joe Biden has dementia or not. I stand by that was the right decision. The way in which it was enacted was terrible. And I talked to him blue in the face about how fucking terrible it was. And then to try to save face through a quick bombing that ended up killing kids is fucking horrific. And then, the way in which the evacuation happened, saying, yeah, we vetted all these people, which was a lie. That's horrific. But the decision to pull out was the correct decision. I stand by it.
State Department was pissed about that.
Right.
About the visa shit, or the vetting stuff.
But I was told by lefties over and over, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. They're vetting all these people. It didn't even make sense that they were vetting them. It's like, how the fuck could they vet them?
Well, like they didn't have enough. They didn't have enough notice.
That's right. There was an emergency. Like that would be like your ship's sinking and you jump on the lifeboat and they're like, yeah, we vetted all these people. Bullshit. People were jumping on the boat. There were people hanging off the fucking propellers. Remember? I
think part of that is incompetence because the government really should have. They should have had they knew this date was coming, and it is totally unthinkable, unfathomable.
I agree.
You would not have your ducks in a row in the lead up to this moment that you know is coming and you said isn't moving.
But you understand this, that to me, right, one of the things that I think that I'm focused on with here is how we were gaslit by members of the mainstream media and members of the Biden administration that were telling us, no, we vetted these people. No, you knew that was bullshit, that would be nigh on impossible. And I knew it was bullshit. Everybody knew it was bullshit.
Well,
of course, I didn't know at the time because I'm likely think it was bullshit because you were like, well, that's questionable. How could we have bungled this so bad that people are holding on to propellers like fucking falling to their death on the way out? But at the same time, we're like, but the one area we got it right was the people checking all their identities in the pipe. Like, it makes no sense. And everybody knew it made no sense. But it's indicative of, I think, the problem we see with our press and sort of all of these institutions batting for the same team, that they all sit there and told us with a straight face, like, oh yeah. These people have been vetted. Yep. They're being housed in military bases. Oh, no. And then it's like, well, they're not being vetted and they're allowed to leave the base. And literally, we're talking about a war zone with terrorists that have incentive to harm the United States. And we're literally flying these people back unvetted and letting them walk off the fucking base. And no one sees a problem with this. Meanwhile, we have a Patriot Act that says that I got to get nigh on molested when I get on a plane as an American citizen. I mean, it was just, to me, the gaslighting, and you see it in many other issues. You see the gaslighting with the economy, strongest economy. You see the gaslighting with the most secure election ever. Not, well, of course, we changed the way we voted, so there's going to be more error and possibly more fraud, but it wasn't enough to swing the election. That's a reasonable statement. Most secure election ever? Come on, horseshit. And it's like that gaslighting of things that's obvious bullshit, which is, by the way, what I'm accusing you of, just so we're clear on it. That's what becomes eminently frustrating to me, because it's like, no, man, like I can see, I'm not going to fucking be gaslit that, that I can't believe the obvious reality that I see in front of my face. I'm just not. And,
a couple points on that. Let me close the loop on the FBI stuff, and then I'll address what you just said. My end position is, I think that for me, I don't buy the story of this was all planned to fuck over Trump's presidency, largely because I think these people did not, think that Trump was going to come in office. And I honestly, if I'm being honest, just given my assessment of these individuals, I really don't think that they came to that meeting of the mind. I think what's more likely is it was a confirmation bias based on what the Russian fucking summer of the DNC and all that stuff, and then information they got from someone they ostensibly trusted. Not to say that the process was like a good one, and I think that the rubber's going to meet the road with the Merrick Garland investigation to see, what's the basis of that warrant and like what's going on there. And I think that that's going to be a big test for the DOJ. And to see if they've learned from the mistakes of Crossfire Hurricane, because there were definitely mistakes. I just don't
see leaks, right?
Some, I think, but a lot of them from Trump Town, so I don't know exactly.
Well, I don't know.
Okay. And in general, like, I'm totally open to being wrong. I don't want to be living in a corrupt state that's being run by a bunch of shadowy overlords. And so, like, that's cool that you're convinced that we're at that point right now, I guess. But I don't think I am.
That sounds like drinking blood out of skulls type shit. I think.
Well, I'm not accusing you of being that conspiracy theorist.
Right. I know. But I just mean, I want to make it clear, right? Like, I'm saying that there are institutions like our bureaucratic state that remain in perpetuity even after individuals leave. And the mechanisms of that are one of the areas in politics where the real levers of power are. And that mechanism can trounce specific individuals that are seen as threatening to it, such as someone like Donald Trump or potentially a Bernie Sanders or a Jill Stein or a Tulsi Gabbard, regardless of the amount of political power that those people obtain. And that it doesn't have to be something that's spoken, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be something that's being done out of like fucking, villainous intent. It could be that those people really think that they're in power that mechanism's there for a reason, because it is the best, and that therefore it's in everyone's best interest to make sure that they maintain that power and stop anyone that's a challenge to it. Especially if you just know deep down in your heart that it's a really bad dude. And they knew in their heart that Trump was a really bad dude, and he was a bad guy morally, and he was a bad guy with his character, and he was a bad guy in that he was incompetent and braggadocious and would endanger this country and our foreign policy, etc. It doesn't matter if you agree with that or not. That's what they believe. And so they felt entirely justified in saying, well, if that means we need an insurance policy, so be it, because the alternative is disaster for this country. They were wrong about it being a disaster for this country. Actually, times were better under Trump than they are under Biden. But it doesn't matter if they're right or wrong. It's not their decision to make. And if we don't start reining in that bureaucratic state and these other institutions where there's sort of these wealthy elite that say that we know what's best for everyone, and so your voice doesn't really matter, then no other issue matters. Me and you could disagree vehemently on climate change, for example, but you better hope the people running the show agree with you. Because it turns out that if you vote for someone that would change the orthodoxy of the sort of powers that are in control now, they'll just fucking crush them.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see if they get elected. I suppose.
Let me ask you.
I
I have to take a piss. Like, and so we got like 3-4 minutes. Can I ask you about the election? Do you
yeah,
have
yeah,
any
yes.
predictions? Like, what do you see the House and what do you see the Senate?
Shapiro wins in Pennsylvania. Sorry, but for your man, Mastriano, I
Mastriano.
think
Yep.
there hasn't been a single poll showing
I think you're
Mastriano
probably
ahead.
right about that. To be honest,
Yeah, so
I'm
that's
hoping.
significant for the state of Pennsylvania. But I honestly think
You think Oz beats Fetterman?
I think Oz wins.
Me too.
And I just see the trend and momentum to me. Republicans always finish strong, but Republicans finishing strong on the headwinds of that um, debate performance, and Fetterman just is cringe recently.
Yeah.
Like he started out really strong in his meme campaign, but every tweet is, for me, at least to me, is just like cringe.
Well,
I
I
think
think
he's an
that let
awful.
me ask you this. Like, I know this is
Yeah,
getting off the weeds a little, but if I was a Democrat, I'd be really pissed off at Fetterman and the people
yeah,
around
I
him
am pissed at Fetterman.
because it's one thing. Listen, I could accept this for the team sports aspect of it to say this. If he has the stroke after the primary, maybe there's some whispers in his ear like, dude, you got to fucking stick it out because if you withdraw, then it's guarantee we lose. So stick it out, make it to the finish line. Hopefully we win, and then we'll replace you if we have to. But if you drop out, that's guaranteed loss. Like, that's one thing. But to have the stroke before the primary, it could have been Connor Lamb, right? It could have been another Democrat
Yeah,
that's now not in a medical situation. And my secret, I mean, this is conjecture in my point, but, I believe that there were people surrounding Fetterman encouraging him to do this. But ultimately, the buck stops with Fetterman despite his medical condition. And to me, it's selfish. To me, to stay in after suffering that sort of an illness and then misleading people going into the primary that voted for you, and then when you show your face in public for it to be that bad, I would be fucking pissed if I was a Democrat. I'd be like, are you kidding me? Like, you just, I
yeah,
mean, it literally, it is not beyond the pale to say this, that Republicans could end up winning the Senate, which if Fetterman would have just said, I'm sorry, I got ill. Now it's going to be Connor Lamb before the primary, that Democrats would have maintained 50-50. How furious are you if you're a Democrat that occurred basically because John
well,
Fetterman and the people around him wanted political power?
I'm furious that it happened there. I'm super furious about that because frankly, I think Connor Lamb was a better candidate. And I'm not really bought into this, the kind of aw shucks. Listen, I like people who are down to earth. Um, and Fetterman, maybe he moonlights in that, but to me, he didn't seem like he was truly authentic. Like he was really talking with the basis of knowledge and understanding, and
Right. You
he
want to
just
know?
seemed like he was a little bit of a charlatan.
You know what? Want to know what Fetterman had? I find this ironic, right? And this has to do with political strategizing, right? Like, regardless of what you think, I believe there is sort of a populist movement occurring in both the Republican and Democratic Party. There's this idea of like, it is not, and it depends on what you mean by populist, but what I mean by this, if you had to take and say which of these general statements do you think would be advantageous to you to election? I've been in office for 10 years and would like to continue serving, or I'm an outsider who's not a real politician. It depends on each specific race, but most of the time in today's climate, I think the latter message resonates, Republican or Democrat more, right? Fetterman, the attacks that Republicans continue to make on Fetterman, this is disregarding the stroke before it, to me, were actually the plus side of Fetterman. So when people would say shit like this, look at that guy. He dresses
Blob.
dumpy. He's like just like looks like a slob that just got off work. Like it's like
Yeah,
that to me. That's fucking an ad for
yeah, I
Fetterman.
like that.
Like the average person's like, now me and you might recognize like, well, that's not always the case. For example, if you're showing up to a funeral, probably don't want to come in sweats and a hoodie, right? So there's a time and a place. But in general, it's hard to make that case. Like, imagine Ben Shapiro making the case to someone like, well, technically it's a very prestigious office and you have to be that. Like, it's like, that shit ain't resonating. The shit that's resonating with people like, like me, that's how I dress when I get off work. That's what you're going to focus on. Oh, you think I'm a shithead because I dress like that? Fuck you. I'll vote for him. Like,
no, I liked that. I liked a lot of the image about him, and I even think that he's, maybe he's a nice guy. I don't really know him, so I can't really say that. And maybe I was wrong to call him sort of. It felt like a little charlatan, but what I meant to say is like I think, for example,
AOC. I think she's a firebrand. I think she is like, even though she's much more moderate and more in line with the Democratic establishment than I think that some people will think on the right side. Like they'll fall in line, right? The squad will fall in line if need be. Um, to me, there is like there's a there's a fire, there's talent. And I saw that lack of. I didn't think Fetterman was a very
She has
talented candidate. Now,
AOC.
but
It's funny. People
yeah,
make fun of her and say she's not intelligent and shit. And there's different forms of intelligent, and sort of in the intelligence of inflaming sort of emotional, good emotional responses in people that are interested in her policy. She is an expert. And I'm not saying she's an expert in that she sits down and plots it out. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying she has a ridiculous talent.
it's a natural talent.
Right, it really is, and I think that it is to the Republicans' mistake if they underestimate her. I do, but when
They shouldn't, because she's setting up. I mean, the reason she endorses Bernie instead of Warren in 2020. I mean, there's a reason for that, because she's the future of that populist wing when Bernie's gone. And so I think that she's talented, and I'm frustrated. Like I think Democrats need to develop talent.
Yeah, they don't have it. I feel that
No.
like with Republicans, I could be like, here, young's a weird word, but sort of new faces, up and comers. Like I think Carrie Lake's good as a voice. I think that she's definitely talented politically. Blake Masters is talented politically. There are people coming up, DeSantis and people like that. Like people are going to think I'm fucking crazy for saying this, but one of the best Democrat political speech I've heard in a long, long time was the 2016 or 2020, I think 2016 DNC speech of Michelle Obama. She fucking killed it.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like Michelle Obama. I don't like the Obamas. And I watched that speech, and I know people write speeches, but the delivery of it and what the messaging was, I was like, that's a fucking speech.
No, but Rob, that's sad. No, Rob, that's sad. The Obamas are still the most talented
It's true.
politicians in the Democratic Party, and they send Obama everywhere more than Biden, and they do that because they recognize that Obama.
I think I think that he's exacerbated. Like they heard people, there was all this scuttlebutt that like Obama's like, Joe, fuck it up, like before the election. Like, and I think that's probably true. I think that you see, look, I don't like Obama. I think there was a lot of corruption and things like that. But I think that Obama, to the extent that he wants to wield sort of power and influence, would like to at this point do it behind the scenes. And he would like to be working on his Netflix show and vacationing with his family and shit like that. And I feel that he feels like, motherfucker, I got to get out there.
Do you think Obama's less corrupt than Biden? Or do you think Biden's even corrupt?
No, I don't think Biden has much authority. I think Obama was corrupt. I think Biden is also corrupt and goes along with it, but basically doesn't know what's going on half the time. So I think like Ron Klain and the people that are like the chief of staff, I think they're just
those are the most.
I think they're Obama surrogates, right? Yeah. I think that mentality of Obama, which was the sort of mentality that like, look, the rules don't apply to me because I'm just smarter and more ethical than the other side. To me, that's what Obama represented with this shit, So where it was like,
kind of West Wing-esque.
That's honestly how I believe that he felt. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, listen, I'm saying as like.
Right, hypothetically, what
I know about you.
You're not saying you agree with that, but I think Biden is ultimately corrupt. Like the problem is this, right? Is it Biden or is it his administration, people running it? I think that Biden isn't running much, but regardless, it's corrupt. It's an extension of the
thing that you're seeing.
Yeah, the administration.
I want to be clear about one thing real quick about
I got to run, but please go ahead and get the final word.
Yeah, the last word here. And also, nice talking to you. How you doing? And I really do hope the Democrats, it's copium. I don't think they're going to keep both houses, but I hope beyond hope that I'm going to be rooting for every single Democrat on Tuesday.
Stream if they lose, stream so we could laugh at you.
Yeah, but I'm not I'm a realist before I'm a fucking hopium. So I think we're going to lose both houses. But one last thing on Fetterman, I would vote for Fetterman. If his stroke was 5 times as debilitating as what it is now. There's, and I think that you would vote for Oz, even if Oz had there are things that I think that you're
hitting on something here. You're absolutely right.
I think Rob, you and I, I've heard you say this before, and I agreed. Like, I wouldn't vote for a pedophile, right? I wouldn't vote for a offender of that kind, right?
That's different, yep.
Or like a murderer who didn't,
that kind of stuff. But other than that, there's very little else in terms of like where we see like our views of the country are such that it would take a lot for me to not vote for Fetterman, right? Like there'd be some big the one thing that I will identify, and you're gonna latch on this right away, and you're gonna hate me for it, and I think you ever identified. There's one issue on which I think it's disqualifying for a Democrat. If you're one of these people, I can't believe we're leaving on this. If you're one of these people who's like, oh, we should be out of Ukraine, we shouldn't fund anything in Ukraine. I am such a hawk on Ukraine and sending money over, not in terms of fighting, but in terms of like sending a bunch of military aid and like tons. And I know you hate that. That like I think I'm gonna tell you this. I might vote for Trump over Tulsi Gabbard on that issue.
That's funny.
It is such an important issue to me, but there are a few things like that.
Well, I'll just say this real quick, and I'll let you go. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think that Republicans are barking up the wrong tree if they really look at themselves when they go, "Well, he's just medically unfit. Fetterman's just medically unfit." What kind of maniac would you have to be to vote for someone? And to which my response is, if Trump had a stroke and was running against Hillary, would you have voted for Trump? Fuck Hillary, of course.
100%.
Right.
You would.
Right. And so, like, even if you say, well, the average Democrat doesn't look with Dr. Oz as much hatred as Republicans looked at Hillary, but it's not just about the individual, it's about what it represents, control of the Senate, right? And if you think that the Republicans represent sort of an attack on democratic norms and, setting this country back to fascism, then you take the stroke victim over fascism. Now, I think that's bullshit, ludicrous, blah, blah, blah. But the factor of, if you are a die-in-the-wool Democrat, I don't think Fetterman having a stroke is going to affect your vote. The question is, does it affect the vote of moderates and independents?
Which it will. It absolutely
right.
will. Yeah.
But so those people are going to take that shit seriously. But yeah, very few Democrats that think like, I think Republicans are the party of Trump and fascist are going to be like, but I got to go with the fascist over the stroke victim. I don't see that happening with a lot of time. But I'm still if I had a stamp, if I had like some sort of animation, I'd go and put the hack label on you still for the Russiagate shit. I think that it speaks for itself what we did on Russiagate and but I will say this. I do appreciate you calling in. I enjoy these conversations. It actually flies by most of the time. And I'm glad you called in. And, I do think it was important, even though this stream is dedicated to me trying to get Republicans to win. I do like bringing on people that disagree.
Yeah, sure.
So I do think that.
Wait, can I have one partial retraction? I'm not sure I would vote for Trump over Gabbard. I'm just saying it's a possibility. But I know I'd vote for Romney. I know I'd vote for oh my God!
Delete this portion. Clip Pisco saying, "I'm just saying I'd vote for Trump," and then clip out over Tulsi. Just be like, "Oh, look at that! Rob North's such a badass debater. He got Pisco to say he'd vote for Trump."
Is that what that thing does to you? Take you out of context?
Yeah.
All right, guys. Lovely being here. Thanks, Aftershock, for organizing, and hey, best of luck to your stream, and I hope you get crushed on Tuesday. But I know you won't.
No problem, man. Hey, take it easy. Right. Thanks again.
Yeah, have a good one. Bye.
Yep. Bye.